Ooh. Okay. Good afternoon. A lot has happened. A lot has happened. Now, I did a members video on Friday evening explaining what's been going on. I don't want to go into too much detail. It's been a bit of a tough start to 2026, and I've had some bad news concerning my cousin who's dealing with a cancer diagnosis. So that's also just being thrown into the mix. So I have discussed that on the members live stream. So that's just what it is, really. Life's been a bit crap to start the year, amongst other things. Now, obviously, we've had the NRL Vegas games. I think it's really good that the Bulldogs Dragons game went down a golden point. I think it was a really good advert for the NRL. The Cowboys against the Knights. There's a couple of injuries coming out of that game. Fletcher Sharp, obviously, with a knee injury, and obviously they've got that extra week, so it will be interesting to see what the scans reveal with Fletcher Sharp, because obviously he's moved into the halves on a permanent basis. So that'll be interesting to see how that all transpires. And of course, the first game of the weekend was the Leeds Rhinos demolishing Hull KR. Now, obviously, Hull KR coming off the back of the World Cup Challenge win, which I think it's been an interesting start to the season for Hull KR. Obviously, they lost the opening round to York. Then they play the World Cup Challenge, win that, although they were holding on in the last 20 minutes, and then they get absolutely steamrolled by a very, very good, motivated Leeds side. And Mike Acevo had a field day. It's a shame he left the NRL, but he's also had a knee reconstruction, so we'll see how Mike Acevo does. He's only played, I think, the one game before this season in the last year, so it'll be interesting to see how Marcus Acevo goes with a full season, hopefully injury-free, but 4 tries in one game. It's a pretty good way to start your season. We've also seen a lot of things happening in North America and in the Middle East that do have sporting implications, but there also are political implications as well. So that's quite interesting. Obviously, what's happening in Mexico and Iran is very, very interesting right now. Obviously, there are security concerns with the World Cup, with what's happening in Mexico right now, and that has dominated a lot of the sports headlines. There's obviously travel advice and a lot of uncertainty surrounding what's happening in Mexico as they are co-hosts now. A lot of the violence in Mexico is not occurring in areas that will be World Cup host cities at the moment. Now, it seems to have quietened down a little bit. There is some travel advice there. Obviously, what's happening in the Middle East with Iran as well. And I do try and keep politics off the channel, but this, I think, does have implications because Iran has qualified for the World Cup. Of course, there's visa restrictions on fans and traveling from a lot of countries, and of course that has the potential to severely escalate from what it is. There's been a lot of tension in the region for some time, and the relationship between the US and Iran has never been great in the modern era. And there's the potential for further escalation. Will Iran as a nation participate in the World Cup? We shall see. Also, we've seen obviously the mass protests and the issues domestically in the US as well. And of course, again, there's been travel advisory given for visiting certain cities, and there's things happening that have raised the spectre of potential boycotts or fans not going. And of course, we've seen the ticket prices and the dynamic pricing policy, which, by the way, if you are going to be watching games in Mexico, Mexico has a non-dynamic pricing policy, whereas in Canada in the US, there is no legislation against such ticketing policies. So it'd be interesting to see if prices do tend to drop in the build-up to the World Cup. Now, talking about the World Cup, obviously we've now seen where countries are going to be basing themselves at base camps, and we know where England are going to be based. They're going to be based in Kansas City alongside the Netherlands, Algeria and Argentina. I find that choice very, very interesting from the FA deciding to use Kansas City as the base of their World Cup preparations and World Cup planning, considering they don't have any group stage games in the city, whereas Argentina and Algeria do. So I find that very, very interesting that they decided to base themselves in basically the Midwest rather than on the East Coast. Now, there is the potential when it comes to the knockout stages that they could play games in Kansas City, depending on where they finish in the group. But it's very, very interesting considering all their group stage games are on the East Coast. But Kansas City is very centrally located. It has a very, I wouldn't say mild climate, but more balanced climate than other areas in the US and Canada and Mexico. Now, Argentina play a lot of, I think, play all their group games in Kansas City. Algeria, I think, played the majority of their group games there. The Netherlands is an interesting one because they were the last nation to announce that they were going to be basing themselves in Kansas City. But the facilities in and around Kansas City are very, very good. Obviously, you've got a professional MLS team based there. You've got a women's professional team based there as well. You've got a lot of facilities that are very, very modern and recently opened, and good amenities. So in that sense, I can understand that logic. England have been criticised in past tournaments for their choice of base camp and training camp for tournaments over many, many years. I don't dislike the choice, but I do raise an eyebrow, because they're not playing any group games there. So that's very interesting with the extra travel and logistics that would be associated with having to travel from Kansas City to, let's say, Boston or Miami, I think, where they're playing games, and travel to the East Coast. It's a several-hour flight, obviously. There's time zone differential and climatic differentials, because if you're playing on the East Coast, you have, the Atlantic Ocean will bring in weather fronts. You've got Florida's always very hot and humid. So that's going to be very interesting. But then once they progress, if because they're not guaranteed to progress from the group stage, if they do progress from the group stage, it's going to be very interesting where they play their knockout matches. Now, Kansas City does have knockout matches slated, so that will be interesting. And the same, could be said for the Netherlands. They don't have any group stage games there either. But Argentina and Algeria, it makes logical sense. They are based in the city and they're playing games in the city. So it's always interesting where nations decide to base their operations for major tournaments. So there is that. Also coming out of the NRL weekend in Vegas, there's been a big hint dropped by Peter V'landys, the Australian Rugby League Commissioner, who is the boss of Andrew Abdo, who's in charge of the NRL, that they're getting closer and closer to investing or buying a stake in the English Super League. He gave a lengthy interview to Sky Sports News. And so that's really quite interesting, especially with a TV deal up for negotiation for next year. And so that is quite an interesting subplot that we've been having this discussion now for the best part of 3 years in the build up to the initial Vegas games in 2023, 2024, 2025, that kind of thing. So over the last 3 years and a bit, since the first Vegas games were held about 3 seasons ago, this ongoing discussion about should the NRL invest in Super League, the debate around the IMG involvement, the TV deal, the money in the game, the salaries in the game, attendances, although the attendances are going up, which is good. How the league is structured, the financial struggles of clubs in the Super League and the Championships, clubs going bust, the restructuring of the game at the lower levels. And the NRL have obviously been having meetings with Super League and RFL officials. Clearly, it's not just a quick fix. This is a long-term thing. That these commercial discussions are taking place and have been doing so for some time. I think this is the biggest hint yet that a deal is close and an agreement is close for investment in the game. Obviously, we will find out in the fullness of time what ultimately is the outcome, but it's looking more and more likely that a deal is going to be struck between the NRL and Super League and investment into the game, into Europe, England and France, it is going to happen. How much the NRL get involved financially and with investment and with player swaps and structural changes and governance, we will have to wait and see. I think the international game is at a point now where you can clearly see the European nations are starting to really struggle against the Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Island nations. I think that's clear and obvious. The gap has grown between 2017 and now. I think the Ashes series summed that up. I think the last Lions tour sums that up as well, with the 3 defeats in 2019. And of course, the 3 straight defeats at the end of last year. I think that gap has widened significantly from the 2 close games we saw at the World Cup in 2017, where the grand total was 12 points to 4 over the 2 games aggregate. The gap has widened significantly. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think we whether it's participation at grassroots, whether it's growing the game outside the traditional areas, which has been a struggle for some time, and there's been a lot of resistance from those within the game for some time. And there's been a lot of criticism of the state of the game as things currently stand. Now, yes, the last, I think, 3 or 4 World Club challenges have been won by English sides. I think we have to look at that and go, it's a one-off game, yes. And what future does the World Cup Challenge have? Should the Super League go back to a winter league rather than a summer league? I think that's had an impact on the quality of play on the field, because we're playing in the heat of the summer rather than the cooler conditions in winter. When if you look at how through youth level in the schools and universities and such, an amateur game, most clubs used to play in winter. I think most schools play in winter because obviously you've got to compete with cricket and field hockey, for example, as the summer sports. And it was traditionally always a winter sport game. I understand sharing of facilities or facility availability, especially at professional level with stadiums and training facilities. Obviously, there is a consideration there. We've seen rugby union and football clubs share stadiums, and we continue to do so when it comes to rugby league. And so, yeah, that stadium availability and fixturing obviously is, and the state of the pitches is obviously a concern that clubs have to be aware of. Obviously, there are a few clubs in rugby league in the UK which do share a stadium with a football club. As a London Broncos fan, we share with AFC Wimbledon. Obviously, Wigan share the DW. St James's Park, for example, has been used for Magic Round. So it is that stadium availability. And we've seen test matches obviously played at football stadiums as well. So interesting one, whether the game should swap back to a winter sport as traditionally was. The TV deal is a big discussion point because the TV deal has decreased in value over the last decade rather than increased in value. And that's obviously a knock-on economic impact on the sport in this country. There's obviously issues with the French TV deal as well. It's only been recently decided that they're going to have a domestic TV deal worth some money. So Toulouse and Catalan obviously can earn a bit of money from the French broadcasters. And I'm not overly on top of how much money that's actually worth to the French clubs. But we've seen, various sports struggle to get TV deals, and various broadcasters struggle financially as well. We're seeing that in North America with regional broadcasting and the struggles that regional broadcasters have financially, and the knock-on impact that has for the major leagues and the minor leagues in North America, predominantly in the US. When it comes to the former Fox Sports network that became Bally Sports, that's now, I forget the name of it now, but the company, the media company that has the rights to a lot of regional broadcasts is basically bankrupt, and there's issues around, will it be viable? Will it get to the end of the NHL and the NBA seasons? Will it be up? Will it still run for Major League Baseball? They're heavily reliant on their income from these regional broadcast arrangements. And they're talking about streaming services and overseas broadcast rights. We'll see what happens. Talking about Major League Baseball, obviously, I've been keeping an eye on what could potentially happen in regards to the lockout or potential lockout. Now, the head of the Players Association has resigned following allegations of improper financial conduct, and there's the background to that. So there's a lot of instability within the Players Association. The league has set its stall out that it wants a salary cap. Obviously, we've had a lockout not that long ago, following the expiration of the previous CBA. Now, they didn't lose any game time, but it created uncertainty going into this CBA, which obviously expires on the 2nd of December this year. And it doesn't seem very likely that we are going to get a resolution whereby 2027 season starts on time. It's looking very, very likely we're going to see a very, very similar to what happened in the NHL in 2004, 2005, for example, where we didn't have a season, or what's happened previously where the World Series was cancelled in 1994. So I think we are with Major League Baseball in a very tricky situation. Obviously, they're trying to expand their global series. Obviously, they played games in London. They didn't play games in Paris last year, which I thought was very, very interesting. And there's uncertainty surrounding several franchises in Major League Baseball. The Athletics, how long are they going to stay in Sacramento? Tampa Bay, what's going on with the Tropicana, and are they going to stay in the Tampa St. Petersburg metro? Are they going to move to Orlando? There's a few other teams that have financial woes and are struggling at the bottom of the standings. They're not spending a lot of money. You've got the Dodgers who are spending vast sums. Other teams not spending a lot. There's talk about the gap between spending, and that's a discussion with the salary cap as well. And I think Major League Baseball is more impacted by the struggles that the regional sports broadcasters are having, because it makes up a bigger percentage of their revenue stream compared to the NBA and the NHL. The NHL and the NBA have got they've worked out better ways to make money, merchandise sales, ticket sales, overseas broadcast deals, taking the game overseas, branding, making the players, the players in the NHL, for example, going to the Olympics. The NBA players will be going to the LA games. Baseball doesn't have the Olympics and things like that. It has the World Baseball Classic, but it doesn't have like a World Championships and World Cups and regional, international tournaments like ice hockey and basketball does. And it's a more niche market outside of North America. Yes, Latin America has a big baseball following, and Japan and Korea and the Philippines also has a pretty solid baseball following. But outside of that, baseball is played at other countries around the world, but not on the level of ice hockey and basketball, for example. American football is very, very similar. Obviously, it dominates the North American sports market, but doesn't have the professional base side of the US and Canada. And so it's interesting. You look at the success of the NFL in regards to its global series, and you could argue all the major leagues have a very successful global series that does increase the profile of their leagues and does increase the revenue streams and interest and player base and fan base. But it's very, very interesting in that regard. Now, obviously, with the Winter Olympics, for example, with the NHL, there was a lot of concerns going into the games about the arena state, the state of the ice surface, the size of the ice surface, not being, it was even smaller than NHL standard ice, which is smaller than IIHF. Ultimately, the ice hockey was very entertaining. And, at the end of the day, there wasn't too much controversy surrounding the ice hockey. Going into the Olympics, there was a lot of concerns. I think Milan Cortina pulled it off. To be honest, the Winter Olympics, I watched bits of it. It wasn't as controversial as previous games. We've had no doping scandals, for example. There's been a few, mildly humorous controversies, I suppose. The drunk presenter from Australia, for example, the cheating in the curling, which was quite entertaining. Really, a sport which curling is such a placid sport. It's like bowls on ice. Like indoor bowls on ice. It's one of those sports you don't expect that kind of controversy, but it happened. It was mildly entertaining. I think the biggest controversy surrounding the Winter Olympics, was the ice hockey arena, which pulled it off eventually. There were some concerns about it. It got through the games, but it was the American policy from their government to send ICE officials rather than the FBI or Secret Service to look after the athletes. And that led to some protests during the opening ceremony and before the opening ceremony in Milan and other towns and cities in Italy when the athletes were turning up and the delegations were turning up. And I think that was the only real controversy. I don't think there was much controversy at this Winter Olympics. I think Italy pulled it off very, very well. They used as many existing facilities and alpine resorts as they could, which I think was a good thing. I think that saved a lot of cost. We're seeing the same with LA in their preparation for the 2028 Olympics. They're going to try and reuse as many existing facilities that are already in place in the LA metro, again to save cost. So it's going to be interesting to see how the LA games play out. Good afternoon, good evening. I mean, I will say this: the weather's been a bit meh today where I live. It's been a bit drizzly this morning. It's not too cold. It's not brilliant. But I will say this about the weather: the flowers are starting to come out already. Birds are already starting to nest. Well, Great Britain, our joint, I think it's our most successful Winter Olympics in the winter era, and our joint best since the 30s, since we last won Olympic gold in the ice hockey. It's been one of our most successful Winter Olympics we've ever had. I think in the modern era, post 1945, it is the most successful we've had. We came close to a couple extra snowboarding medals as well. We missed out so slightly in the opening days in some of the snowboarding. We could have had more. I think we've got some great young athletes in some of the more extreme sports coming through. So I think it was a success. This is the thing about the Olympics in general. I will say this: it doesn't carry the same fanfare that it used to. I don't enjoy it as much as I used to. I think the skeleton, I don't know. The only training facility we have is, I think, is at the University of Bath or the University of Loughborough. Where I think they do a lot of their training at Loughborough and a lot of their training at Bath. And obviously, we don't get a lot of snow in the southern half of the UK, especially in those areas. Although this winter, some parts of the country have had a lot of snow. I don't know why we're so good at skeleton and reasonably good at bobsleigh. I really don't know why. I could not tell you why. The sliding sports, as they're known, luge, skeleton, and bobsleigh. Why we've got such a good program? We just do. It amazes me, the success we've had in those events and how competitive we are in those events. The bobsleigh program is actually really good as well. May I just add, a lot of the bobsleigh, skeleton, and luge initially was army. Was always army based. Obviously, with my dad being in the armed forces, and obviously my mum being an army wife, and obviously the army does give a lot of opportunities for people to be athletes. Some of our greatest Olympians are ex or current military personnel, or they were back in the day. It's just the starting one. I don't know why. The start is one of the biggest parts of it in regards to the three sliding disciplines. I find it interesting that that we are that good. Obviously, you look at a lot of the sliding athletes, so the bobsleigh, the luge, and the skeleton. They have a sprinting background, a lot of them, or a background where you need a lot of power in your legs. I know some ex-rugby players and football players, for example, have all transitioned from those sports into the sliding events as well, because you do need to run a lot. You need to have a lot of lower body power. Um, but I don't know why. Honestly, I could not tell you why we're particularly good at those events, considering we only have the one training facility. But there's obviously clearly been a lot of support and funding for those events, and we've had continued success over multiple Winter Olympic Games now. So it's obviously paying dividends. It does interest me why. Bath, however, is in quite a hilly part of the country. That part of Somerset is got some very steep. I think it's the Mendip Hills, very very steep, and that is a good replication of a start ramp on a luge track or a skeleton or bobsleigh. It does replicate that start very very well. Um, but it does amaze me how, with the lack of facilities, that we can continue to do it. I hope more funding is given to improve the facilities at Bath and elsewhere. I think it's very doable that we could have just an indoor track facility built where it does replicate an Olympic or World Championship sliding centre. We have indoor skiing centres. We have outdoor. I mean, we do actually have skiing locations in Scotland. But it amazes me how we're very good at snowboarding, skiing, and a few cultural things at the games. I did hear about it. Yeah, the ski jumpers and their bodysuits. That's been a discussion for years, though. That's not a new thing. How ski jumpers get round the fitting of their bodysuits. Ironically, you want it baggier as possible, not as sleek as possible. The American Chinese skaters, one represented China, one represented the US. Honestly, that we've seen eligibility and choice of nation before. You look at, for example, the men's ice hockey team in this country. A lot of them are Canadian or have Canadian parentage and were born here. So the Eileen Gu, is it Gu or Hu? How you pronounce it? That we're going to get there at every Olympics, where choice of nations, swapping nations, and eligibility. We've talked about international eligibility before. I think the only reason why it's controversial is a parent's background. It's the only reason why it's controversial. What Cheatgate or what with the curling of? Yeah, I mean, look, that was funny. The ski jumping, again, the ski jumpers have been bending the rules and pushing the boundaries for years. We can go back to Eddie the Eagle for that. And when I say Eddie the Eagle era, we're talking the late 80s, early 90s with Eddie the Eagle. Obviously, Eddie the Eagle was the best we had, and he was just very good at going down and landing safely without crashing. We've come a long way since then. But yeah, with the ski jumping, they've been trying to find an edge. It's the same when who was the Australian middle distance runner from the 2000 Olympics? Cathy Freeman with her bodysuit. The same argument was had with Cathy Freeman's bodysuit in the 2000 Summer Games in Sydney. We've had it where certain athletes have tried to push the boundaries of what is legally allowed. That cheat game. That was the cross country biathlete. That was hilarious. The emotion of the moment. That was quite funny. I think he got caught up in the emotion of the moment. If he had his moment again, I think he wouldn't say those things. And at the time, I think I just look. Morally, that one was quite funny. I thought the cheat gate I was thinking of was the curling with both the men's and the Canadians team actually breaking the rules and being called out on it by their opponents quite rightly. And then the Canadian attitude was very negative. But Cheatgate, I mean, Christ. I saw clips of it. Obviously, he was speaking to Norwegian TV, not international TV. So he's talking in Norwegian. A few things might get lost in the English translation and stuff like that. But it's one of those moments where, heat at the moment, the emotions are running high, and he just blurted out his personal relationship business in front of like a billion people. In regards to the curling, yeah, you're not allowed to touch the opposition player's stone with your hand, and that happened. I don't know what happened in the women's curling cheating, but I saw the highlights of that, and I think it was the Swedish or the Swiss team. I can't remember who it was, but they called them out and they called the match referee and said, "Look, he's broken the rules." And the Canadian player just started mouthing off a load of expletives, which was clearly picked up by the microphones, and that didn't go down well. And then the Canadians lost anyway. But no, I don't think it was an overly controversial Olympics. If we're being brutally honest, we've had no doping scandals, which generally, apart from the ski jumpers, allegedly, penis gate. I don't know how we go about that, but it's to do with their ski suit fitting. But we actually haven't had any athletes fail dope tests or get, disqualified for actual cheating in an event. I don't think the US actually destroyed the opposition. They just had Connor Hellebuck, and as a Jets fan, I'm happy that he had a good game, stand on his head in the final. You put another US goalie in there, I don't think they win the gold. People could argue, Sidney Crosby got injured earlier in the tournament, and that impacted the Canadian team, or some of the line combinations and the squad selection. And look, as a Winnipeg Jets fan, Mark Scheifele not going was, I think, an unwarranted snub. He's been a very good player for a long time. And first game back, his no-look pass for a goal was just brilliant. And so you could argue, the roster selections and who missed out, and the line combinations and the coaching, and the Canadians still got a silver. So it wasn't the worst, but I think 2010 completely was a much better Olympics when it comes to the ice hockey. We did see one with the French and the Canadians, but under Olympic rules, fighting is not allowed, and it can lead to, players being, lengthily banned. I think they brought that rule in following the World Juniors in 1988, where the Soviet and Canadian team were fighting for like 20 minutes, and they kept turning the lights on and off to stop them. International rules is refereed differently, and the rules are applied slightly. There are rule variations compared to domestic leagues. Obviously, fighting happens in the domestic leagues, less so in a lot of the European leagues. But there were some tasty hits. It was a bit more physical. A lot of fans responded quite positively to the lack of, ad breaks and gambling ads and ads on the ice and ads on the boards, and the game's actually starting on time and all that. But look, I think it does pose questions, however, about the future of the All-Star game, because obviously we had the Four Nations last year as sort of a practice event for the NHL shutting down while the Olympics is on. And people are saying that we need to continue with the Four Nations format, or a mini World Cup or something like that. That in itself, but the rivalry between the US and Canada has been there in every sport you can think of. Rugby union is a big rivalry as well. For many, many years, the Canadians were the dominant side there. They call it soccer, we call it football. The Canadians are on the rise. The US are sort of treading water in that regard, and that rivalry started to grow. Last year, we saw a rugby league international between Canada and the US in the Vegas weekend. So the sporting rivalry is there. It doesn't help that in recent months and in the last couple of years, the political situation between the US and Canada in regards to the governments and trade disagreements and tariffs and rhetoric, I think, has ramped it up as well a little bit. And there's a backdrop to that with them co-hosting a football World Cup and the tensions between the two nations economically um, in recent times. But when it comes to sport, ice hockey's the big one, and then the two codes of rugby and football are the other ones where the US and Canada would regularly compete against each other, and in most instances, Canada actually comes out on top historically. The US and Canada, when it comes to ice hockey, it's a very tasty rivalry. Well, what happens with Mexico? Look, in 1986, the reason why Mexico got the World Cup for the second time in 16 years, which was almost unprecedented at that point, and still is, was the situation in Colombia. The cartels there, it was getting very violent. Escobar and all the other cartels in Colombia, and there was the ongoing um, civil war, basically. There were paramilitary groups on both the left and the right wing, and then the cartels, street gang. It was very violent in Colombia. Very, very violent. And FIFA were like, shit. We can't guarantee. And in the mid 80s, I mean, Latin America was exceptionally dangerous. Mexico was dangerous as well, but it was seen as, well, when football comes here, 1970 and the 68 Olympics, problems simmered down a little bit. There was a lot of political tension and all this. Um, and it sort of was moved because FIFA looked at 1970 and how actually the country was quiet, basically. The street gangs, the cartels went, okay, we'll be sensible. What's happened here, and I don't want to get too political, but there is US involvement in it. And again, the rhetoric coming from the White House and from Washington. Things have changed drastically. And there's a lot. It's not the violence in Mexico is not actually happening in the host cities of Monterrey and Guadalajara and Mexico City. It's happening in a different Mexican state primarily. The optics look bad, but the three host cities are actually in safe states where the cartels don't have a lot of power, and so the narco terrorists and the street where they're pretty safe. As long as you stick on the tourist path, you're pretty safe. What's happening though is the rhetoric from the US and the ongoing war on drugs, as well as political interference, and there is an element of there is some left-wing paramilitaries going around in Mexico and some right-wing paramilitaries, but we get that in the US as well. I've watched a lot of documentaries and been researching this. It's like, well, actually, there's a lot of armed militias, both left and right wing, in the US and Canada as well, who are heavily armed and are politically motivated for a variety of different reasons, and are on the terror watch list. So, I think at this point, look, this World Cup has already been proven to be very, very controversial, very controversial. And I find it interesting because the two previous World Cups in Mexico, the previous World Cup in the US, the Women's World Cup in Canada, a decade or so ago, there was no concerns about boycotts and the politics. No. How come it's hosted? Well, 1970, it won the bid. It was allowed to host. 86, what was meant to happen was Colombia was meant to host as the host nation. They had won the rights. And the political situation just was so bad. FIFA went, we need a host nation. Oh, Mexico's already got the stadiums. We'll go there. They wanted to stay in the Western Hemisphere. They'd signed a lot of sponsorship agreements. They wanted to keep it in that time zone. Mexico had the facilities from the 1970 World Cup, and they went, it was a success in 70. We're going here again. We need a replacement quickly. They had a ready-made replacement there. That's basically what happened. End of. Obviously in a simple context. The reason why they got it this time is the World Cup's expanded, and Mexico has got hosting history. They're actually using a couple of stadiums that were used in the previous World Cups. The US has got hosting history at the men's as well, and it's got a lot of modern facilities. And obviously, the MLS is trying to grow. And Canada hosted the Women's World Cup. I think it was 2013. I believe it was 2013. I'm racking my brain. It might be 2015. I can't remember. But they've hosted a Women's World Cup in recent times. And again, they've got modern stadium facilities as well. And it's an expanded World Cup. And FIFA, obviously, the US put a bid in, I think, for the 2018 World Cup as well, as we did. And they've got the infrastructure in place. Obviously, Trump was in the White House the previous time when the bid was announced, and actually, he wasn't. Obama was actually the president when the bid was announced, and then when they won the bid, he was president. And the US has also got hosting rights for the upcoming, in the early 2030s, for the men's and women's rugby union World Cups. And of course, they were meant to host the Rugby League World Cup last year. Ultimately, they got moved to France, and now ultimately moved back to Australia. So the US has got the Olympic Games, and you will see this with nations. Look what happened to France. They obviously hosted Euros. They're getting a Winter Olympics. There's a few other things, Rugby World Cups. They've hosted twice in a very short space of time when it comes to Rugby World Cups. The French, obviously, it happens in batches, basically. Russia, Winter Olympics and a World Cup in the space of 4 years. Brazil, an Olympics and a World Cup. It seems to happen like this, where a nation or nations, host nations, will have one major event, an Olympics, for example, be it summer or winter, or World Championships, and then very shortly after have a football or another World Cup. Qatar hosted a World Athletics Championships and then hosted a World Cup. So the fact that the US has got all these major sporting events lined up in the next decade. Mexico, obviously, the organisers thought we're going to need a joint bid. It isn't, they obviously knew that at some point the format was going to expand, and they put forward their proposals, and FIFA went, yeah, okay, thumbs up. Now, I think what's going on in Mexico, you could argue what's going on in the US, in certain cities with I'm going to say political violence, which is what it is. There's definitely some security concerns, but I think most fans are put off by the price, and a lot of countries have got visa restrictions for entry or complex visa requirements or waiting lists. So the US, I think, is heavily banking on domestic fans turning up to fill the void, and expat communities to fill the voids for fans in attendance. Whereas in Mexico and Canada, their visa entry requirements are different. You can get the short-term tourist visas and go. What is interesting is the dynamic pricing policies of the three nations. Now, Canada and the US don't have any legislation in place preventing dynamic pricing, whereas Mexico does. So that's an interesting subplot to things. And even in Mexico, fans are like, it's expensive. And now we've got these added security concerns. Those security concerns were there when the bidding process was happening. They were. Some of the cities in the US are just as dangerous as some of the cities in Mexico. Let's not get ourselves. There's some very safe cities in Mexico, and there's obviously some very safe cities in the US and Canada. But some of the cities in the US have shocking crime statistics and violent crime statistics and murder rates that we might complain over here in Europe about, or Australia, or South Africa. South Africa's got some very dangerous cities, but they hosted a World Cup in 2010. There was no talk of boycotts in 2010. And from what I gather, while the football wasn't the best World Cup, the fan experience was pretty good. And the South Africans were very humble hosts, despite the security concerns there. So when you've got sports mad nations, Mexico is very passionate about its football, very passionate. Latin America is passionate about baseball, football. I have no doubt that it'd be very stupid for the cartels to continue the violence because it will cost them money. Because one thing that's very interesting is tourists like drugs. Tourists like a good time, and cannabis and cocaine can add to a good time, and that's what the cartels are renowned for selling. They're not going to want to hurt their bottom line economically. The violence doesn't help with that. It damages their business model. It's just common sense. In regards to why the US, Canada, and Mexico bid one, money. There's obviously massive. What we're seeing is, look at the TV rights. Now, Mexico's got a very strong footballing history. It's the strongest of the three nations historically when it comes to competitive matches, making knockout stages, and having a lot of top players play in Europe. Many more than the Canadians and the Mexicans. But looking at it, FIFA has realised that the European game has created a new audience in the US. And it started to grow after the 94 World Cup. And that was part of the FIFA idea, was growing the game to a non-traditional market, which the US is. And MLS starts. But it's the David Beckham effect. He's gone from a player to a team owner, which is crucial, or he's a part team owner in Miami. But it was the David Beckham effect. And because the Spice Girls were massive, obviously, in the 90s and the early 2000s, his wife, obviously that helps. The David Beckham effect, I will call it that, because they had Pele, they had George Best and some other top players play in the 80s, and they were done. They were right at the end of their careers. They were literally out on their feet, struggled. But the whole principle of the 94 tournament was the US has to set up a professional league structure, the MLS, and that was part of the bidding process. FIFA obviously realised satellite TV and the American audience and the disposable income of the US was a big thing, and the commercial aspect of it. And look, the 94 World Cup, we can argue that the quality of play on the pitch and the weather conditions in the stadiums used and whether they were appropriate or not. But not US 94. I will say this: they used existing stadiums. Admittedly, they are American football stadiums. Let's be honest. Not a lot of fan shelter. It was very hot. It was the first World Cup that I watched because I was too young to watch Italia 90. And I remember watching some games. But I was very young at the time. But looking back at some of the iconic moments from that tournament, the Bulgarian team, the Swedish team, and their exploits. Some of the underdogs did quite well. Now, obviously, the MLS has had its struggles, and you can split the MLS into two halves of its existence. The first half pre-Beckham and then post-Beckham. Or the first decade or so, there were some financial struggles. They didn't attract a lot of fans, playing in half-empty stadiums. Not really establishing themselves. But then, because of the 94 World Cup, it did increase the interest in the European leagues. And then the European leagues and UEFA realised TV rights are a big thing. Let's start trying to negotiate favourable media rights with the US broadcasters, which they've done. ESPN, NBC, I can't remember what there are quite a few. Fox, quite a few broadcasters, bought highlights rights or live game rights, that kind of thing. And then we started to see a couple of American players actually doing quite well in European football. Some in England, some in Germany, for example, and do reasonably well, play for some top clubs. And then the Glazers decide to buy Manchester United, and that is a big turning point. Again, the David Beckham link there. And the rest is history. As soon as the Glazers buy Manchester United, I think the same year the Tampa Bay Buccaneers actually win the Super Bowl as well, but that it's subplot. As soon as a major American ownership group that already was getting success in the NFL, as soon as they went, we are interested in buying this global brand, which what Man United was and still is, that changes the conversation. And then we start seeing the US national side have some decent runs at World Cups, making knockout stages, winning games. And we see more and more top US players playing in Europe. And we continue to see that to this day. And then the Canadians start getting good. And then obviously the Mexicans have always had a great history. But it was basically that moment, the David Beckham link, and then the buying of Manchester United by the Glazers changes the conversation. And since then, a whole host of North American investment has seen the Premier League and other European leagues as an investment, and it continues to grow. Now, you could argue the Premier League was very, very good and very aggressive in its media rights negotiations. Same with the same with UEFA with their European Cup competitions, like Champions League and what is now the Europa League and Conference League, formerly the Cup Winners' Cup, and they were very aggressive in getting TV rights deals into the US. And the US was like, we want to win. Right? We want to win at everything. That's because the US think they're the best at everything. And in order to do that, they've got to grow the interest. And as soon as, they've hosted a World Cup, it's like, we want to win this. It's not a World Cup if we're not involved. That's a good way of looking at the US. It's not a World Cup unless we're involved in some way. If they're not involved, they don't take the sport seriously. If the US is involved in a World Cup of any sport, suddenly we've got to be the best at this. Now, whether they are or not is another thing. So the last 3 decades has led to this co-hosting. They want to prove that they're the best North American team, and they want to prove that they can compete at the highest level. Now they've Club World Cup. You could argue that was a bit of a failure. A bit of a failure is an understatement. It wasn't a great advert for the game. It wasn't a great as well attended as they hoped. You thought they might learn some lessons with pricing. Kickoff times, I think they have, but ticket pricing, they haven't. They've doubled down on things. And you look at the doc that was released in 2018 on their bid process and what they were going to charge for tickets, and what they're actually charging for tickets is kind of insulting. Now, whether they've had changes within the organisation committee and those organising and liaising with FIFA, I think FIFA were the ones controlling that narrative, and they've decided to try and maximise and make as much money as possible. Quite honestly, you could argue FIFA have really dropped the ball on that one. The fact that fan zones, not all of them, there are some cities that have decided to go, we're going to have free fan zones independently of FIFA, but FIFA said we're going to charge entry to fan zones. It's the first time that's ever happened at an international football tournament. That's gone down like a lead balloon. Hasn't gone down well, and I think is rightly criticised. Look, obviously the time zones was going to be a problem, but Brazil pulled it off in 2014. You could argue when Argentina hosted in '78, we're talking about early days of satellite broadcasts, and we're in the analog era, but you could argue those 2 World Cups, similar time zones, did quite well. But ultimately, the decision on ticket price is a FIFA decision, obviously with involvement with the organisers. That's the narrative they can control, and they've got that woefully wrong. And we can argue, Infantino and his leadership of the organisation. We know there are fractures within FIFA. CONMEBOL and UEFA are not getting on particularly well with the FIFA hierarchy. It's been well documented for some time. I think Infantino is even worse than Blatter was. I think Blatter was I wouldn't say incompetent, but I think he was in office for too long, and things happened under his leadership that were avoidable. A bit of nepotism happened. The fact that Infantino was his VP basically um, doesn't sit well with me. We're seeing similar issues with the FIA, with what's happening in their governing body in motorsport, and FIA, they're the motorsport governing bodies internationally. We are seeing similar things occur there in regards to the leadership and certain things happening. And when it comes to global sports administration or sports administration in general, I think we've reached a point now where questions do need to be asked of the competence of people governing international sport. There is a lot of money involved, obviously, a lot of commercial deals, but governance has been shocking, and there is corruption, and it's very embarrassing that we're in 2026 now. We've just entered March 2026. God, time's flying, and it's very, very noticeable that the level of competency we are seeing is poor, and just governance in general is not good enough. Be it domestically here in the UK when it comes to sport, or globally or regionally. Well, it doesn't matter what sport we're talking about and at what level. Governance is not good enough and hasn't been good enough for a long time. A lot of bad decisions have been made. Fair enough. Okay, in hindsight, could do things differently. But when it actually comes to sports governance, it's weak. It's not great. There's a lack of transparency. There's financial corruption all over the place. And the FIFA revelations in 2015, I think they sort of gave North America the World Cup as like, okay, well, here you go, as a sort of like a reward for exposing some of the crap. I think Infantino is relying on this World Cup to pay off and make them as much money as possible, and all the stadiums to be full and no controversy. This will make or break any re-election hopes he has. We'll see. We will see. I have genuine concerns about this tournament. I have genuine concerns. I think Mexico actually will be all right. Honestly, I think things will calm down. It's a brief surge in violence, but the war on drugs and what we call the narco war, and then the political violence in Mexico has been going on since the 60s. So this is not a new issue in Mexico. What's happening in the US? I mean, look, we've had the civil rights movement in the 50s and the 60s, and there was, the Vietnam War protests. There's been an undercurrent in the US of political violence since the US's inception in, the Revolutionary War. We've had multiple presidents assassinated and senators and Congress members, so. On a standpoint, I mean, look, when the domestic fans in the US are saying that we can't afford to go to a game, we were really looking forward to it. Kids were looking forward to it. Now it's not affordable. That is, yeah. Look, that's concern. In regards to VAR, I think I think the idea of using tech and assistance and trying to work things out and make the game fairer and get rid of errors, I understand that in an ideal world it would work perfectly, and I think some of us were naive that this was long overdue, and it was long overdue. I don't think we can deny that other sports have been using tech and video refs for a lot longer and have been with a lot less money, like tennis, rugby union, rugby league, cricket, ice hockey. They've got less money globally, and some leagues really don't have the money to have that kind of systems in place, but they somehow do it. I think it's actually weakened the on-field ref, and I think it's made them less decisive. If I can say that, I think it's made them less decisive and less confident in making decisions. They're more likely to make mistakes. If you're low on confidence, you're more likely to make a mistake. If you're questioning yourself and then relying on that safety net, you're more likely to make mistakes. I think it's been badly implemented. I think 2018, when we had it at the Russia World Cup, and I will say this, in Australia, okay, not the biggest league in the world, the A-League, we can all say it's not the biggest league in the world, but their big showpiece event, their grand final, because their league structure is obviously different. There's no promotion, relegation, but think of it like an FA Cup final or a Champions League final. Their league final, the VAR failed. And the referee was like, had to think on his feet and go, did we award this goal? Or did we not award this goal? In the end, actually, the decision that the referee gave was actually correct, looking at replays and whatever. But the system failed. And there were concerns going into the 2018 World Cup that something like that would happen on the global stage and be very, very embarrassing for FIFA and everything. I think we had a good basis in 2018 for a good system, a good basis. What has happened in the last 8 years has been muddled thinking. And I'm going to say that it's been muddled thinking. Different leagues have interpreted different rules and are using VR for different things. And there's been a lot of muddled thinking. And the implementation has been, and some countries have now voted to drop using VAR in their domestic leagues. I think it's Sweden. I think a league went, we're not going to do this anymore. The fan experience is vital. They are stakeholders in the game. I didn't watch any of the FA Cup fourth round. Didn't watch any. Not because I don't like football. I've just reached a point now where, well, this year's been tough, and I did a members video Friday explaining what's going on, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I've had a tough start to 2026. And then earlier, obviously, I wake up Friday morning for work, and I thought I'll just, check the news and check, see how my friends and family are doing. And my cousin's battling cancer, so that was a shock to the system Friday morning, and I just went, this year's been shit. We're 2 months in, I've had enough. The tooth's actually doing all right. I'm waiting to hear back from a dentist. I was told 3 to 6 months waiting list for removal. So I've got to get in contact with them and see what's going on and how long I've got to wait, but it's about fitting me in. Tooth's actually all right. It's calmed down. I actually think I might not need it removed. It might be another one I need removed that isn't causing a problem. It's coming through straight now. It's just the depth it's sitting at. It won't sit evenly with the other teeth. So I don't know what's going on. In regards to refs getting lazy, I mean, the FA delayed a year before implementing the use of VAR. I remember the Charlie Austin rant, and that, I think he got heavily fined for that. But I think he was right, because not only was he pissed off with the fact that it cost his team points, but the opposition as well. And they're like, what's going on here? Is it a goal? Is it a foul? Is it not a foul? Is it a clear and obvious error? Whatever. And I remember the Charlie Austin famous rant, and I don't think he'll ever. That's the highlight of his career, ironically. I'm not saying that he wasn't a good player. He was a good player, actually. He was half decent, Charlie Austin, but he was right. But with the way we have the media training now for players, we're not allowed characters to show emotion, which I find frustrating. It obviously, clearly, players and coaches were like, we are frustrated. But because it was seen as criticism of the league and criticism of the governing body, he got fined. Well, actually, I think he was saying what everyone's been thinking for a long time. And this is back in 2019. It's before COVID. And the Charlie Austin rant will go down in history. I don't think he even regrets what he said. I think he was right in what... I mean, people, laughed at the time. Social media went a bit mad. They've made memes and reels out of it, and it pops up occasionally. Someone's made another reel out of it and made a funny joke. But it's true. And that was 7 years ago. I hadn't even moved into the old apartment at that point. That's how long ago it was. But the same principle carries on. I remember Alan Pardew gave a post. I think it was an FA Cup game with Alan Pardew when he was West Brom manager at the time. I think it was against Liverpool in the FA Cup, if I remember. About roughly the same time. Maybe a little bit after. Maybe VAR had been introduced at this point, maybe not. But Alan Pardew quite had a similar, not a rant. He didn't go off on one like Charlie Austin, but he was like, we don't fully know as managers and players and fans what's actually going on here. I think Pardew did some punditry for the World Cup in 2018, and he was like, where do we stand? When is, what's actually going on? I think it was after the first season it was introduced. And you got a high-profile manager at the time coming out and going, well, what actually is going on? What are the protocols? How is things going? And I think he was also correct in some of his criticisms. And again, we are going back some time ago, and again, I think we're going back pre-pandemic. But those were two post-match interviews that stick with me in regards to the criticism of before the system, and I think the early years of the system. I do think the thinking has now got very muddled. I think we've lost the whole principle of why the video assistant referee system was brought in. I know they're looking at the offside rule and going back to the 1992 interpretation. I've got to find that little rule book that I was given as a kid, because it was published, I think, 92, 93, 94, early Premier League era. And it's got basically what a shirt pull is, an automatic booking. It's called cynical foul play. Abuse of an official, so dissent, is automatic yellow card. These rules haven't changed. You've got indirect free kicks and direct free kicks. Accidental handball, even in the box, is an indirect free kick. But referees, for some reason, go straight to the penalty spot. Well, no, you've got to apply the rule book or the law book correctly. And we weren't seeing that for a long time. And these rules are still on the rule book, basically. It amazes me, especially with the offside rule, how the interpretation completely just kept changing. Go back to the 1992 interpretation. To prove how long ago this was, the back pass was, and the keeper picking it up was still a rule. And I think the year this was published, that was the last year that was going to be the case. But the back pass, where the player could pass back to the keeper and the keeper could pick the ball up, was still allowed. Now, that was got rid of, I think, in the build-up to the 94 World Cup to make it a bit more entertaining for the American fans. I think they got rid of the back pass. They changed the back pass rule in the build-up to the 94 World Cup as one of the rule changes. And I think that was a fair rule to change. I think we can all agree that was deliberately slowing down the play, and they wanted the ball in play for longer. They wanted more action. Fine. They wanted to speed the play up, basically. The game was speeding up, but they wanted to speed up a bit more and make it more entertaining and increase the goal scoring, because goal scoring was actually dropping at that point per average 90 minutes and over seasons. So goal scoring was actually suppressed a little bit. They wanted to increase goal scoring. And by forcing the keeper to use his feet and think on his feet rather than pick it up, it created another element of uncertainty, which could lead to mistakes, which can lead to goals. But I've still got this rulebook, so I think it's in storage at my mum's. But it's a very interesting insight into what the game was like three and a half decades ago. And ironically, it's how the game lost its way in regards to application of the laws of the game, or rules of the game. Right? We call it laws technically, but you know what I mean, the rulebook. And the offside rule has been frustrating for donkeys years. Active, not active, is he aware with bull crap? And I think looking at that and going back to the 1992 interpretation is the correct thing to do. It makes VAR work easier in that regard. What also stuns me is the length of time it took to get goal line tech in. That one really, Christ, it took until 2014. That was too long, far too long. And you could argue, would that have changed the result in the 2010 World Cup between England and Germany? Well, it was such a glaring error. It was so embarrassing. But that's neither here nor there. That's hindsight. But England, that was a poor World Cup. England had played poorly at that World Cup. And we can argue, was that Capello's fault? Was that the players' fault? Did the media have a part to play? All that. But FIFA were forced to act after such a glaring error in a major tournament in 2010. It was just so bad. But the fact it took so long until 2014, whereas other sports had, again, been using video technology and goal line tech and video assistant referees for a long time, again, as I say, with less money. The wealthiest sport in the world. I mean, that was almost on bordering on Luddite levels of resistance. Just weird. Um, but I will say this: I think the refereeing standards. I think we have a right to question the standard of officiating, but there's a way of doing it, and I do think with what we've seen with some referees and their falls from grace. I think David Coote is the example we can use where we could argue that things were going on within the PGMOL where they knew bad behaviour was happening. I think there is no way, and I will say this, because I've seen a couple of these podcast interviews where they've got a referee or a former referee and they're asking the questions and they ask about, scandal. And one of them said David Coote actually was one of the more well behaved off the field when they do their public speaking events or they have get-togethers and training camps and they have get-together. They go out for meals and drinks and socialise. The scary thing is, I can't remember which referee it was. I think it might have been Clattenburg. Was giving an interview and he said, "No, David Coote was one of the more better behaved." Or might be Mike Riley. I can't remember. And one of them, former referee, was like, "No, he was one of the more better behaved and less controversial off the field in regards to private life and so when they would get on the partying and drink and they would go to these let's say FIFA meetings, for example, where they have to go and away from meetings, they go out and they do these training camps and they have these admin sessions because they do." And obviously the revelations that have come out about him being a cokehead and a sex offender, the fact that his colleagues were like he was one of the better behaved ones is deeply concerning about the impartiality of officials and the checks and balances and screening and all sorts. But then you've got to look at the abuse grassroots officials face on a Sunday league or a youth game on a Sunday. And why we are, and it's all sports, and why we are struggling to recruit, train, and then retain match day officials. And don't get me wrong, I've been to football and rugby matches, football and ice hockey games where I've been I've had a bit of chirping towards the officials. I'm not gonna lie. Some of them actually like it. Some of them actually feed off that. Okay, yeah, fair enough. But you've got to look at it. A lot of them are part time. A lot of them volunteer their time, and they don't get paid a lot. A lot of them have full time jobs as well as their refereeing duties, and in all sports at grassroots level. And a lot of them do it voluntarily. Some of them are ex players, and it's great to get ex players involved in officiating and administration within any sport, and keep them involved in the sport in some capacity if they're not going to go into coaching. And if media isn't a route for them, it is, I think, very, very vitally important that ex-players do have a role to play in the grassroots, in officiating, etc., etc. But as a fan, yeah, of course, you haze the referee a little bit. You give a bit of chirping from the stands, and we're all guilty of it. But it's the grassroots level where the players disrespect. Some of the horror stories you hear from the non-league and the Sunday leagues and the grassroots level from parents on the touchline, it does make you wonder why. It doesn't make you wonder. It actually sums up we have a recruitment and retention problem. And also they're not paid a lot. So there is that, okay, a bit of bribery, a bit of match fixing. And there's a reason why that happens is a lot, they're paid a weekend. There was a guy working where I work on the bins around here. We had an agency guy who was a Berkshire FA ref. He was at the lower levels. And I asked him, how much do you get paid for a weekend if you're refereeing like a couple of youth games and then a Sunday league game or a non-league game? He goes, well, this is how much you get for each level. And you can earn a bit of money over a weekend, over a Saturday and a Sunday, if you on the Saturday, Sunday, whatever. You get a bit of cash, not a lot, and you work it out. It's like, is it really worth your time? Unless you're cycling there, if you're using your own public transport or you're driving your own car, you get the game. Is it really worth your time and effort in cost just getting to referee. And it would be, you could, some weekends, if you refereed like 3-4 games, yeah, you could earn a bit of coin. If you refereed in evenings in the week, get a bit of coin, but you've got to balance that with day job and other commitments. It's not a lot of money. You have a bad feeling for this year's World Cup. I think everyone does, for a variety of different reasons. Will Iran play? Oh Christ. We've seen nation boycotts before because of the Soviet and US boycotts in the 80s of Olympics. Watch this space, because if they do decide to pull out or they don't go, who replaces them? They've got to find a replacement nation. And of course, we've got later this month, we've got the playoffs for those final nations to qualify. So we've got another international window in a couple of weeks, I think over Easter. So there's going to be another international window, and a couple of nations like Wales and Northern Ireland, Italy, for example, in Europe. Those are the nations I'll be following, are going through the playoff structure. So if Iran do pull out and say we're not going with boycotting, you've got to get either another Asian qualifier or just find a nation just to fill a slot, who would be competitive enough to fill that slot in the group stages. I would say watch this space. We've got to see what happens. But then again, when the Iraq war was going on, Iraq played in international tournaments. So Afghanistan played Test cricket with all the things that are going on there. So we will watch this space. The fact that the US is involved militarily, that's such an open-ended question. It really is. It's a watch this space with that one. I have a funny feeling that they won't go. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if the team go, because a lot of the players are actually based in Europe. So it's an either or. FIFA have got a lot of headaches now. What's happening domestically in some cities in the US with the federal government and that situation and the protests and riots, and then what you're happening in Mexico. Even though I will stress this, the cities that have got the issues with ICE enforcement in the US and the state where the cartel violence is happening in Mexico are not locations where games are going to be played. That's the irony of it. But again, there is that concern that unrest could spread. Honestly, with the Iran thing, I've got a feeling that they might. It wouldn't surprise me if they don't, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if they do turn up as a squad and play, regardless of any hostility they might get. I don't think a lot of players are overly fans of the Iranian government. So it's going to be interesting. A lot of the Iranians play in Europe, so that is, or in other leagues outside of Iran. So in that regard, it's take your pick. In what, the Vegas games? Yes, I did. I sort of half asleep, sort of watching both. I didn't watch the Leeds just demolition job of Hull KR, but I was awake for the start of the Cowboys Knights game. I watched most of that, and then I sort of nodded off for a little bit. Then I woke up again, and then I watched most of the Bulldogs Dragons, and again I woke for in and out listening about, because it was really early in the morning. But I caught Golden Point. I'll rewatch them throughout the week, and then of course the rest of round one kicks off, and then we can get into it. Yeah, the new Everton Stadium has obviously proven itself as a very good venue for rugby league. It works for rugby league. It would also work for rugby union. Obviously, football stadium. It's a multi-purpose stadium. Obviously, Everton want to start paying off that stadium, so by hosting more and more games there, I think of other sports will assist. And I do believe it's going to be part of Euro 2028. So they've Everton as a football club want to host as many non-football events in the stadium. The Hill Dickinson, I think its official name is. Um, Bradmore Dock is the area, so they obviously want to, you know, host as many events there as possible. It's very similar to Spurs, and it's very similar to obviously with the Wembley rebuild, and obviously the NFL taking games to Wembley, for example, or the Olympic Stadium having athletics and American baseball played there, and Union and League games played there. So whenever a new stadium is built, depending on the cost and how quickly the stadium can be paid off, uh, the host, the anchor tenant, or the owners want to host as many events there to pay off as quickly as possible to balance the books. So, not surprised with that. Also, it is the UAE. I think they were the next nation up. Well, if they're the next cab off the rank, guess what? The UAE's been hit with Iranian drones and missiles and artillery ordnance, isn't it? So again, that's an interesting one. I mean, look, it's a very delicate situation. The UAE might be brought into this conflict. They haven't been involved yet as an aggressive power, but the US has bases there, and the UAE there's been some damage done to infrastructure in the UAE. I don't think it happens right away. With the NRL thinking about a global round, look how long it took for the NFL to expand past London with the global series. It didn't happen within the first few years, and I don't think it happens with the NRL. The NRL just does not have the financial backing that the NFL does. So it will happen. I don't think it happens within the next 5 to 8 years. I think it was going to take a little bit of time. I think obviously Peter Volandis has obviously been very open, has basically dropped big hints. He said quite a bit out loud about the NRL getting involved with Super League. I think a deal is going to be announced publicly. I would say around the Challenge Cup. I would say when the Challenge Cup finals taking place in May, we will get a formal announcement from the NRL and Super League about NRL funding and investment and buying a stake in the game or whatever transpires, or commercial agreements between clubs. And then I think we'll get an announcement from the Super League about London Broncos being the next team off the rank to go up. Will they ultimately play in London? Well, we've seen the discussion around, obviously, the Challenge Cup final being played at Wembley and how it should be moved either to the Midlands or the North. I wouldn't be surprised if the Emirates, actually, because of stadium availability, I wouldn't be surprised if the Emirates, because, well, you do have the American football pitch that Spurs has. The Emirates hosted a World Cup semi-final. It was a sellout. It was the best game of the tournament. That semi-final between England and Samoa went down at Golden Point. Obviously, as a fan, obviously I want England to make the final, but that was a really good advert for the international game. The fact that England had battered Samoa in the opening game of the tournament, and then they're playing the semi-final in dreadful conditions, I will add. That was a proper test match. And I would think the Emirates, being a smaller stadium than Wembley, you're more likely to sell it out, and empty seats don't look great. And with Wembley and Club Wembley and a lot of the issues there, and rugby league fans being very critical of the use of Wembley for the Challenge Cup final, I would think potentially Old Trafford. Old Trafford would sell. The Etihad would sell. St James's Park would be a good one. They've got Everton Stadium. They've got Hull. They've got stadiums. I think Everton, Bramley-Moore Dock, or St James's Park would be a better option than having it in London, personally. But you want to get the Aussie fans. There's a big Aussie community and Kiwi community, a big expat community in the south around London because of tech jobs in Cambridge and the M4 corridor. You've got obviously a lot of international firms based in London and the southeast. So around here, there's a lot of Aussies around here. I mean, there's a lot of Kiwis. I mean, Zinzan Brooks, he lives up there. I used to do Zinzan Brooks bins up in Windsor. He lives up the road. So a great All Black legend. So We'll look. We'll see what happens. We'll see what negotiations take place. Rugby, as a London Broncos fan, I would actually like to see the Challenge Cup final move to a more central location in the country, just for attendance. Or if they're going to keep it in London, the Emirates, I think, as a slightly smaller stadium, you're more likely to fill it. Same with Spurs' stadium, but it's stadium availability, isn't it? And it's ease of access, and you know, it's a difficult one. It is a difficult one. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I think it does happen. I think it happens in a similar time frame to what happened with the NFL. So the NFL comes to London in 2007. People are like, this is a one-off. This is a tax write-off. It's just a one-off. The FA want to start paying off the stadium debt. They're just excuses to try and use the stadium for many different things as possible, make some money back, speed up paying the debt off. And then the NFL were like, well, we'll come back. And the FA were like, okay, but we'll have 2 games next year. Really? And then it just grew organically. The FA made a lot of money. The NFL realised it was actually profitable. And the viewership was good, and the time zone worked. So more people live on the East Coast than the West Coast of the US. So that sort of worked. So you got to think of that. But a global round, some of the cities do raise some eyebrows whether they're actually it would work. They're talking about Miami in the US and some other cities in the US, and LA and Miami and some of these other cities were mentioned when the NRL were like, we want to go to North America during COVID. They obviously realised that the sport needed money quickly. Because of the pandemic and the shutdown, the game nearly went completely bankrupt at the professional level. And they I've listened to the interviews and the documentaries about the decision to go to the US, and they were looking at multiple cities on the West Coast initially. They even looked at Honolulu, but Honolulu doesn't have a stadium that's usable because the stadium there is just falling apart. But they looked at LA, they looked at San Diego, they looked at San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle, and then Vegas as the Western cities. And they did look at Miami, they did look at New York, they looked at Boston, they looked at Baltimore, they looked at the Midwest. And the time of year they wanted to go, winter in the Northeast is brutal, winter in the Midwest is brutal with snow effect. Miami would be the only, or Jacksonville or Tampa would be one of the only stadiums they could use in Florida. The rest of the country gets a bit snowy, and Vegas was like one of the options. They were going through there was an interview that Peter Blaney's did, and he literally turned up with a whiteboard, put a list of US cities down: West Coast, Midwest, East Coast, Gulf Coast, bang, 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 bang. And very quickly they whittled it down. As soon as they got to Vegas, and it was like a 5-10 minute meeting, and very, very quickly we're like, well, they've got a stadium with a roof, and the time zone isn't too bad. It's doable for a global audience. Vegas works, and Vegas has got a lot more hotel space at that time of year than I think any other US city, pretty much. The problem was in the first year was the Super Bowl was played in Vegas. I think that overshadowed it significantly. I think if they'd gone a year earlier or a year later, I think they would have had a bit more initial impact in year one. But it worked. And we can argue the pros and cons of taking the games to the US. But the TV audience in the US has grown 3 consecutive years. I think the numbers we're going to see from this year are going to be higher than last year. If they can crack 1 million, maybe 1 million plus, maybe 1.5 million viewers, I think that's a success. If they got 500,000 last year, they've got a good working relationship between Fox in the US, Fox in Australia, because of that shared kind of history. They've got a good working relationship, so that works. I think the first year there was some mistakes made. I think they learned from them very, very quickly. Year 2 was, I think, I would argue the games weren't as good as in year 2. I think the 2 games in year 1 were the better games. But then looking at the Dragons Bulldogs and going down a golden point and right to the death, I think was a great advert for the game. I think having a blowout game in game one, you couldn't predicted that with the strength of both sides, Hull KR and Leeds Rhinos. You would have thought that'd be a closer game, but it wasn't to be. I wouldn't say the second game. I wouldn't say Cowboys Knights was a blowout, but you can clearly see that the Cowboys have still got a few issues with their roster and a few issues defensively. The Knights, I think they're buying into Holbrook. I think that new coach bounce has helped the Knights. And they were the only side with a new coach this year that went to Vegas, was the Knights. And you can see that new coach bounce. You can see more positivity around the club. I wasn't expecting them to win. I was expecting them to be competitive, but I wasn't expecting them to win. I think 2 of the 3 underdogs won. If I was to bet an accumulator, I would have lost because I was betting that all 3 underdogs would win, and then the Bulldogs pull out a golden point win there. But I was tempted to go down the bookmakers and put some bets on. I didn't. I could have won a fair bit of money if I did. I would. British Speedway has become a joke. I haven't watched Speedway since 2019. It's more popular in Eastern Europe, like Poland and the Baltic states now. That's where it's very popular. It's been struggling in the UK for some time. There's not as many speedway circuits around. Safety standards, the cost, the lack of media exposure, I think, is a big part of it. I think it used to be on Eurosport, but obviously media rights are very, very important, and media exposure is very, very important. And it just can't compete with other forms of motorsport. It just doesn't have the appeal in this country. Teams are folding. Speedway tracks used to share facilities with dog tracks, the dog racing, and there's less and less dog racing tracks now, and so it's facility availability, funding, sponsorship, media rights. It's just not there. That's why I think it's getting worse and worse. Do I think London Irish could join the URC? Look, I think the announcement that the Premiership is now going to be permanently a closed shop, and you've got to apply to enter and reach criteria. Look, Eddie Jordan obviously was involved in resurrecting London Irish a little bit with his personal finances, and of course he was dying of cancer at the time. We didn't obviously know how serious his cancer was, but he's now passed away. But the amateur club still exists. I think the RFU and the Premiership, I think they're making some decisions short term. Okay, great, but long term, I don't think they're going to benefit the game. Same in Wales. They're the uncertainty is a big thing. 20,000 expats, 10,000 Northern, and well, you've also got the overseas fans who will ultimately want to come. But then I think it also devalues the Challenge Cup final. If we're going to continue to have the Challenge Cup final in London, that's a big day out. It's an expensive day out. I think that there's obviously a big Aussie and Kiwi community in the country. We know that. It's given, especially around London. There is London and South. There's a big expat community. But the Northern fans, that they still travel down for the Challenge Cup final. I don't think at the moment with what the London Broncos are doing, you're going to have 20,000 British locals or London locals turning up. I really don't think that's going to happen. London's a rugby union city, and London Broncos, well, they're building. As a London Broncos fan, they are building something. That turnout isn't going to happen. Now, the RFL are looking at post 2027. So the Challenge Cup final is going to be played this year and next year at Wembley. We know that, and that's had the length of the deal. And the deal expires, and they're doing a review, and I think they're going to look at either a smaller stadium in London or moving out of London altogether. So it's not an international round is not going to happen overnight. Obviously, they would like it to happen. I don't think it does on the level they want. I think they could have, all of round one, for example, in the US, like Vegas, Miami, LA. They could have, multiple. They could get the whole of round one in the US stagger it over the 2 weekends, for example. I think that's more likely to happen. They have mentioned Miami. They have talked about LA and San Diego and San Francisco and Seattle and Portland. They have stadiums that could be used. I think it's a bit ambitious at this point for the NRL to go, we're going to have a global round. I think they need to look at how the NFL did the London series before expanding in Europe and Mexico and Brazil. I think they need to look at why Major League Baseball has struggled outside of Latin America and Southeast Asia and Japan and Korea in regards to taking baseball overseas, and why they're having a lot of missteps. I think the NRL need to really look at the North American major leagues and learn some lessons, and even discuss with them how has it worked, how has it not worked. I think they need to still build the US audience or the TV audience. I think that's important. And look, there's a lot of what ifs and uncertainty right now, especially with politics in the US and the geopolitics and economics and trade and cost of living and tariffs and counter tariffs, and it's a bit complicated. It is a bit complicated. I will stress that. Look, London could definitely do an NRL doubleheader. Yeah, look, we know that. But is Wembley the right stadium? There are other stadiums in London that I would say work better, just for what you're expecting with crowd. I didn't realise it was St David's Day. Obviously, we're reaching that point where Easter's around the corner, isn't it? I've got to double check when Easter actually is, because I've got to work that weekend. Fucking hell. I've got to work the Good Friday and the Easter Monday, so I've got to double check when Easter actually is. I think it's the last weekend in March this year, so I might take the first week in April off. Might be a bit cheeky. I need a week off work anyway. You fancy the Roosters? I don't really know. I think this year is very, very open with the way the Broncos were so convincingly outplayed in the first 60 minutes of the World Club Challenge. They were all over the place. I think the Broncos look a little bit vulnerable. I think the Raiders mixed. I would say mixed. As a Raiders fan, I want them to try and back up what they did last year, and do better in the finals. But I think the Raiders, if they can get it right, challenge. But this is where people go, oh, the pre-season. There were some good performances by some teams, and there were some really bang average performances by others. I don't put a lot of stock in the pre-season. It's the regular season that counts. You can have a really good pre-season and then be really poor in the regular season. So Gold Coast and Parramatta were the two best teams in the pre-season. I don't see Parramatta or Gold Coast winning the grand final. But you never know. Gold Coast might, actually start turning things around. They got a new coach. Parramatta, second year with Jason Riles, and it's the post Dylan Brown era, and they looked very good. But they're basically their elite 30, their starting roster, and then those players around the top 30 were going to be the players that are going to be used throughout the season. Injuries and suspensions permitting, they look good. They look fitter. They look motivated. They look really up for it. Gold Coast, they look good as well. And again, they look fitter. They look a bit more motivated. Is it Josh Hannay? No, it's not Josh Hannay. Yeah, it is Josh Hannay. New coach. Again, I think that new coach bounce. I think a young coach coming in, fresh ideas, different ideas. I wish they kept Holbrook, to be honest, but so that'll be interesting. Will Spurs go down? Well, they nearly did last season. And again, I don't know what it is. They win a trophy last year and sack the manager who wins them a trophy. But I work with a lot of Spurs fans, and the same thing comes up. We've got injuries, fine, but the depth isn't there. And this is where you have to still continue to question the transfer policy over 2.5 decades. It's plain and simple. They develop players, there's no doubt on that. They've got a good youth system, but you have to question the transfer policy of the players they sell and the players they bring in. And the constant changing of the coach. It doesn't matter that I forget. Obviously, Levy's no longer chairman, but Lewis is still partly involved with the ownership. But they've got this new investment that's come in as well. So you've got to ask the decisions taken in the boardroom. And you listen to every ex-manager, and they're all critical of the club. They're all critical of the club. Postecoglou, Big Ange, very critical. Mourinho, very critical. Conte, critical. I think Pochettino is the least critical of the former managers. I think he's been. He's been. Well, he didn't win a trophy though. I think he's the one who's had the longest stint in the last. Apart from Juan de Ramos, I think he's and Redknapp. I think he's had the longest stint in charge in the last 2.5 decades. But I generally think they could. I feel sorry for Thomas Frank. I think he should have stayed at Brentford, to be honest. But you see where Brentford are and where Spurs are. The building blocks he built at Brentford are still there, and they're outperforming their London rivals. Yes, they are a smaller club, but you can see the performance differential is stunning. The player retention, the player recruitment, the player development. You've got to start asking questions. Was the stadium rebuild required? Was that stadium rebuild required? Could they have not done things differently? I don't know. It cost them a lot of money. It overran. That impacted signing players for that little window, which I think was their Premiership window. They finally win a European final, but it wasn't entertaining. I fell asleep after a couple of minutes. Not that I missed much, apparently. And both finalists, Man United and Tottenham, nearly got relegated. And in 8 separate seasons, both clubs would have. It just shows how bad the 3 teams below them actually were. That's the terrifying, fact of the matter. I think West Ham and Forest, and you could argue other teams as well, are probably struggling more. I think obviously we know Wolves are done, but other teams are struggling more, yes, or also in equally bad situations. Well, they weren't near relegation in regards to last season, but in 8 separate previous Premier League seasons, that points total would not have been enough to keep them in the league. That was stated at the time. It just proves how bad the teams that were relegated actually were last season. But in 8 separate seasons in Premier League history, they were below relegation level. That's how bad they were. I think there is a possibility, yes. They brought in Igor Tudor. I think that's a left field decision. I'm not doubting his credentials because he seems to be the big Sam of Italian football. Look at Igor Tudor's record. He comes in, saves the club from relegation, does his job, moves on to the next one. He's an impact coach. I think this is a bigger task than anything he's done in Italian football, Igor Tudor. Great player, though. A lot of people are like, who's Igor Tudor? You weren't paying attention to football in the 90s and the 2000s. He was a brilliant player. But I do think there is a risk. There is a risk. There is undoubtedly a risk. But anything can happen. Igor Tudor might be able to just get enough points, keep him up. Igor Tudor as an appointment does surprise me, but obviously Carrick, who has played at Spurs, is now the interim at Manchester United, and so I think he would have been a real good shout to get in the door. Tim Sherwood, give him another stint. But I think those bridges have been burned. Klinsmann, beloved at the club, Klinsmann. I actually think Klinsmann could be a good fit. I genuinely do. Pochettino, there's been hints that after the World Cup, Poch could come back, depending on how the US do. And he's had his issues, Poch, with the US team and the media and players. So, but you look at all the other managers who've had success, who've coached there, and it hasn't worked. Sherwood, obviously coming through the ranks, through the youth team, he was the one who gave Harry Kane his debut back in the day. So, club legends. There's clearly no direction at the club. I think their window's passed. They're in trouble. It's like the 90s all over again and the early 2000s where Spurs were just mid-table at best. And, that I think is they've definitely declined very, very quickly. They've fallen off a cliff very, very quickly. And you could argue the stadium rebuild, I think, was the start where the decline begins. Yeah, I think it would be. I think it would be bigger than Leeds United's. When Leeds United went down, I think it would be bigger than that. But then Nottingham Forest, they were a big one at the time. They're the two big ones, I think, from my lifetime. Villa as well was a big one. But you look where Villa are now and the improvements made and the turnaround, and they're working on a tight budget, and they've proven they you can have good internal development and a very shrewd transfer policy whilst working on a budget. Prove you can be competitive and you can compete in Europe and domestically and have a good season. Villa were mediocre, I think is a good way to look at it before they finally got relegated. But Spurs have been up and down all over the place for a long time. And while Villa have had a longer gap between trophies and a longer trophy drought, the media have coined Spurs as a Big Six club. But financially? Not by success. Not in recent times. Yeah, but then if Villa's under investigation for financial fair play breaches, so should Chelsea. Chelsea are basically openly fiddling the rules. So Man City, if Villa are under investigation, Man City have got to be found guilty. But we know they're guilty because UEFA found them guilty and they got off on they got a reduced punishment on a technicality over statute of limitations, which the Premier League and the FA doesn't have. So we know Man City are guilty. The fact that that's been dragged out is embarrassing. But how quickly they obviously punish Leicester, Nottingham Forest, Everton. I think the Premier League has made a rod for its own back, and the Football League as well, by allowing the Man City debacle to go on since 2018. I think even 2016 they were already under investigation. It's dragged on that long. Decade. They've made a rod for their own back by not doing a parallel investigation with UEFA. I think we could have solved a lot of problems about a decade ago, quite frankly. And Man City being found with other breaches with youth policy and transfer and all sorts. But Chelsea as well. Chelsea are also equally. If City get away with it, the integrity of the game is completely gone. And a lot of other clubs will lodge legal protests. Of course they do. They were found guilty by UEFA. They got off on a reduced penalty under a technicality. And the technicality was, at the time, statute of limitations. Okay? There was a time frame where UEFA should have got things done and they didn't. The Premier League and the FA don't have those statute of limitations in their rulebook, so they're guilty. We know it. Man City need to stop this facade, take the punishment, move on, and rebuild. Simple as that. It's simple as that. If the Premier League can find other clubs so guilty so quickly in a very short space of time, then you can't have it one way for one set of clubs and another way for. Of course, Chelsea are guilty. I mean, look at the losses they've announced. The second biggest in footballing history, and the biggest in English footballing history. Well, no. Well, here's the thing: the offences weren't EFL offences; they were Premier League offences. first up. And you could argue that the EFL are a different organisation to the Premier League, and they inherited a problem. Oh wait, I've argued this before with Morecambe's situation at the beginning of the season. Football governance is a joke. They're cherry picking the clubs they're punishing. First up, because in reality, I can't remember. Was it before COVID? I think it was in the years running up to the pandemic. And there was an article put out, and I looked at this, and then the pandemic obviously exposes it. I think out of the 92 Football League clubs and Premier League clubs, plus I would say those clubs that are ex-Football League clubs in the National League structure and the non-league structure downwards, I think about 70 to 75% should be fined and docked points for financial breaches under the rule, for rule breaches of various kinds, be it youth policy, which Chelsea, Man City have been found guilty of before, to the, something like 70 odd % of clubs are in breach, right? And the authorities don't want to do that because it just would be a complete embarrassment for the league, and the integrity of the league's gone. But the integrity of the league has gone because they've allowed these clubs to get away with it, and they've been weak in enforcing the rules. There's no winners here. It's a catch-22. You either enforce the rules for all or you don't. And now they're cherry-picking the flavour of the month, the clubs they want to go after. You can't do that because in reality, Man United should be docked points. Chelsea should be docked points. Man City clearly should be docked points. Liverpool, they all should be. All of them. All of them. And they can't do that because it would damage the integrity of the league. Oh, wait, no, the integrity of the league's already gone because Man City have been allowed to get away with everything for so long and it's dragged on for so long. They've made a rod for their own back. Same with the Football League and the non-league. They've made a rod for their own back over the last 3 and a bit decades. And the same can be said across Europe as well. They've made a rod for their own back by the weak governance. I think Germany has the strongest governance, in my opinion. Germany seems to have the strongest footballing governance in Europe. I think Scandinavian countries as well are pretty solid for the most part. But I think that's my opinion on things. Man City, because Juventus were fiddling matches though, and they're bribing officials, and it was very wiretaps, and that was also had a criminal element to it. Although there is actually a criminal element to Man City with some of the allegations. Sheffield Wednesday, look, at the end of the day, I think a lot of Sheffield United fans realise the importance of the rivalry to the city and realise the importance of the rivalry to both clubs. Look, Burnley right now, and both Blackburn and Burnley are in financial difficulty. Debts are spiralling for both clubs as a Blackburn fan. I would hate to see Burnley go bust because I like the rivalry. Right? Love the rivalry. It's important. Burnley won both games last year, which is bloody annoying. But I like the rivalry. It's an important part of the game. It puts bums on seats, it sells tickets, sells interest, the highlight clips, the players going at it, the fans going at it, go viral. I think while Sheffield United might have a laugh and a giggle, and a lot of their fans will, I think at the end of the day, most of their fans probably have a relative or a friend who's a Wednesday fan. And they've also had their own financial difficulties in recent times and transfer embargoes. And Sheffield is not as divided as, let's say, Bristol when it comes to a city rivalry, where it is that neighbourhood is definitely blue and white, that one's red and white. It's Sheffield is very similar to Dundee, where you can have two brothers, and same with Liverpool. You can have two brothers, one supports United, one supports Wednesday, same with Everton, Liverpool, Dundee United, that kind of thing. And it is hurting the community. It is. Sheffield is a sports mad city for one thing. There's almost every professional sport in the country is played in Sheffield. But it's not like that area's Sheffield Wednesday, that area's Sheffield United. It's very much like Liverpool and Everton and Tranmere on Merseyside, where fans of all the clubs mingle and are all related. You might have three brothers in Merseyside. One's a Tranmere fan, one's Everton, one's Liverpool. It's that kind of city. Sheffield doesn't really have. I don't believe Sheffield has that district. The city's United. That district's Wednesday. I think it is a bit more. You're either red and white or blue and white. Other cities are a bit different, but I think that's my feeling with Sheffield. Same with Liverpool, same with Dundee. They're three cities in the UK where it's not community based, if that makes sense, or sectarian based like in Glasgow. It's very much you find your team in Sheffield and go, I prefer United. But no, seriously, I think it is legitimately one of those cities where you get this in some of the European cities as well, where you've got some of it can be neighbourhood based, some of it can be social based, and politically based. But Sheffield is, I think, one of those cities where the rivalry is you can be brothers, best mates, work colleagues, and you're not going to come to blows and that kind of thing. Bit of friendly jibing between friends and relatives and all that. But Bristol is definitely a divided city, dangerously so. I'm not going to lie on that one. And London as well is also, historically at least, you've got your different districts in London. But no, Bristol was definitely a city of two halves there. Definitely so. It's definitely Glasgow is another divided city. Edinburgh's another divided city where you've got more than one club. Glasgow especially, because Rangers is the Govan area. Partick obviously moved around a little bit in the city. You've got obviously Clyde are on the Clyde bank, and Celtic is also that religious sectarianism. And Partick's the only club in Glasgow where there isn't that sectarian element. Very interesting. Partick doing very well in the Scottish Championship, have a very good chance of getting promoted to the SPL, which will be very interesting, having three Glaswegian clubs in the top flight again. Hearts can win the league, yes. If Hearts win the league, that's a good thing for Scottish football. I honestly believe that. I think. But what we're seeing in the boardroom with Rangers and Celtic is quite worrying in regards to the dysfunction and the financial issues and the anger. And fans are definitely expressing their frustration. But I Partick have a very good chance of going up, and Hearts have a very, very good chance of winning the league. They're not running away with it like they were at the beginning of the season, but they've got a very good chance if they just keep picking up one. It doesn't matter if it's 1-0 or whatever, they keep just ticking along. That obviously, but Hibs have been a very solid side now for a few seasons as well. So it's good to see that the Edinburgh derby has meaning at the top end of the table. And it's not just the old firm dominating this year, which is really good. And St Mirren obviously winning, I think, the Scottish League Cup. I think also definitely very important. I think we need that in Scottish. We need that turnaround. We've seen it with the national side with Steve Clarke. We've got to see it in the domestic league where other clubs are winning trophies with more regularity and challenging with more regularity. I think it's vitally important because it breeds new life and more interest, a potential investment. I think that is what Scottish football needs. I think the dominance of Celtic and Rangers and the politics behind that is definitely weakened the Scottish game. And look, the last team not called Rangers or Celtic to win the league was Aberdeen. And they've had a lengthy struggle for a long time where they've not won a trophy for a while. And I think it is vitally important that your Hearts, your Hibs, your Dundee United, Aberdeen, Motherwell, St Johnstone, St Mirren, whatever other club, if Partick do make it back to the SPL, I think it's vitally important that the league is vibrant and competitive at the level it's at, because when you make it vibrant and competitive, and other teams within the league structure are winning trophies and competing for trophies and competing for qualifying for Europe. That increases the profile. And when you increase the profile, you increase the potential for investment and better TV deals, which means more money to the game, which means more investment in the game, which means more growth in the game. By making it exciting and different, because it's become so predictable for so long, it's definitely weakened the brand. And I think, I can't remember if it was St Johnstone or Kilmarnock did the cup double a few years back, and that got Steve Clarke the Scotland job. I think that's important as well. Well, the Bodo Glint, yeah, look, I think since I did that club history video of Bodo Glint, they've gone on, I don't know what it is, but they've gone on this epic run both domestically and in Europe over the last couple of seasons, where they're making the latter stages of European competition. I think it was they made the semi-finals of, was it the Europa League or Conference League a few years ago, and they've dominated Norwegian football for the last few seasons. And that's ever since I did that club history video about Bodo Glint, they've just gone on this really, the win percentage is ridiculous. And yeah, they've got on a bit of a run. This is what the Cup Winners' Cup used to be like in the 80s and 90s. This is what the European Cup used to be and the UEFA Cup used to be in, and what became the Champions League before they decided to ruin it group stages. This is what it used to be like, where a club like Bodo Glint could go on a run, start knocking teams out home and away legs, go on a winning run, build some momentum and make a final. If Bodo Glint actually do it, pull it off, I would think that would be the best thing for European club football. I think that would be the best thing for European club football if they were to go on and have success. I think that would be. I don't think UEFA would like it, but the fans would. Honestly, I think fans would. The underdog winning, I think, is the best thing. UEFA might not like it because it means less revenue potentially. Because Bodo is not a big. The area in Norway is not a big Norwegian city by Norwegian standards. It's a small fishing town. It's 20,000. The population of Bodo Glint would fit in Ewood Park, I believe. It's that kind of around 30,000, but it's not a big place. But the fact, I don't think so. I don't think so, because they could have been ripped apart after they had their last European run. Didn't happen. So, and clearly, they went a long time without success in Norway. Again, look at the football club histories. They went a long time with not winning in Norway, and they built some. And if they do get ripped apart, that's the sad reality of the modern game. I don't like where the modern game's going. There was a comment left on a video the other day, and for some reason it went into my spam folder. I don't like why that's happening with certain viewers and their comments going straight to spam for some reason. It's either because they have a second channel, like History of Football, and it's the second channel of Rugby League History, I believe. It keeps going spam. But this guy was like, I can't believe this. It was to do with why I think European football should bring in a salary cap. I did this video during COVID, during the lockdown, because obviously what had obviously happened was the lockdowns happened and it exposed the finances of clubs and how they were overspending and not doing things properly. And this viewer, he left a comment and he goes, I can't believe I'm seeing this video recommended to me after nearly 6 years of it being publicly on the channel. It shows how weird that is, isn't it? So clearly, when it comes to discussion around European football and salary caps, clearly that discussion's been had somewhere in Europe in the media, because it got recommended to this viewer, and he goes, why is this? I think, and the situation goes, I think in the 6 years since you made the video till now, I think we need a salary cap more than ever. But he goes, it's amazing that this has been recommended to me after being a video for 6 years. And I remember making that video discussing potential salary cap, and should we have a European? Is it time for European football to bring in such a measure? It was 6 years ago. I was a much younger man. I a lot has happened in 6 years. I've aged. I've got grey hairs now. I'm closer to 40 than I am to 30, which is not the case back then, because I was 30. But no, jokes aside. So what I find interesting is a video like that is recommended after 6 years to a viewer. So it obviously says to me that the talk of a European salary cap in football is clearly a discussion that's been had somewhere. And it's obviously on social media somewhere. And clearly the algorithm has said, you're going to be interested in this to this viewer. Now, whether that's because this viewer also likes other sports that have salary caps, talked about Major League Baseball and their looming lockout, which is going to happen. It does, suggest to me that we're looking at the spending rules, and we've been obviously discussing points deductions and clubs under investigation and trying to bend the rules and get around financial fair play or PSR as it's now known. I think PSR is meant to stand for proportional spending rule or something. I think it is a topic of discussion because the MLS has a salary cap. We're obviously having a World Cup in the US. And other leagues have spending constraints or salary constraints, and rules in that regard. I think it is a discussion that's being had, and I think we're on the path to it. I think we're on the path to a salary cap in some form or luxury tax system that we currently have in Major League Baseball. I think European football and the European leagues are sort of trending in that direction. I think it will actually ultimately protect the lesser leagues, like the Norwegian League with Bodo Glimt, for example, and potentially Tromsø. Yes, I remember when Tromsø played Chelsea in the UEFA Cup back in, was it the Cup Winners' Cup in Viali in the snow and the freezing temperatures. I remember that in the mid-90s. I do remember that. I think it was Cup Winners' Cup, that one. I believe it was Cup Winners' Cup. Profitability and sustainability, that's the one. But they just changed the name of financial fair play and tweaked the rules. It's the same thing. Just be financially compliant, basically. Live within your means is basically what they're getting at. Because last summer, I think it was last summer, I was where was I going? I was going somewhere. It was definitely last summer. I was waiting at the train station, it's delayed. And I got into a conversation with these two gentlemen who obviously had been at a conference, actually at an education conference at a local where I used to go to school, actually. And I went at the station. I said, I can't help but overhear that you've been at I used to go to that school, and I got into a discussion with them, and I just got into discussion with them, and I mentioned that my late grandfather had been involved in the pushing for educational outcomes, and I mentioned who he was, and the older gentleman was like, well, I'm a Labour peer, member of Parliament, as in House of Lords, and we got a discussion, and eventually I got involved in sport. I said, this is what I do as a hobby, and it makes me some money because I was obviously getting paid at the time. I just had a YouTube payment. I said, this is what I do as a hobby when I'm not at my day job and when I'm at home. And I was talking, this was in the build up, I think, to the French, maybe a year and a half ago. And it was just before I did the video on the French league and the financial crisis and Lyon's and Bordeaux's problems. So about a year and a half ago. Well, yeah, about that. And it was just as we got monetized that August. And I was just about to do the video on the French league and its financial issues and the potential collapse of clubs. So about a year and a half ago. And I got talking to them. And I basically said, what happened with the banking crash 15 years ago? 15 years ago. Same thing is happening with football now. They're spending money they don't have. They're racked with unsustainable debt. And the regulation around it's weak. And I got into a lengthy discussion with them on the train journey. I was really talking to them for a good half hour, 40 minutes. I said, look, and then ultimately the second train we were getting was the same, another connection train. And I really got into a conversation with them. I said, look, this is what's happening. And the regulation's weak. The clubs are spending money they don't actually have. The whole system's built upon debt. They're overpaying bonuses and the players and the coaches and the agents. They're overpaying money for their assets, which is the players, the coaches, and the backroom staff and the stadium. They're overpaying for the assets. They're borrowing money that they have no hope of repaying. Yet there's money in the system. There's a lot of money in the system. There's a lot of money going to waste. And I basically said it just subprime mortgage crisis, professional sport. We're talking football, but professional sport, football in this case, but you could argue multiple different sports, and just change banking system, professional sport, just change a few words and you have exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. And I think this was during Euro 2024. Yeah, I was going up to see some mates. We're going to the pub, watch some games. This was in Euro 2024. And I basically said, this is what's happening. And this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. This is Man City are under investigation, obviously, so that this is going to happen. More clubs are going to get, and then ultimately, since that conversation, look at the amount of points deductions. And it was just an offhand conversation, just bumping into someone randomly, having that random conversation. And you get into a conversation when you're traveling and you're waiting, airport. It happens all the time. Get into that random conversation with someone, and it was I wouldn't say an angry, passionate. And the younger guy was like, "Really, you think that?" I said, "Seriously, I'm not a financial expert, but I studied politics at college. My late grandfather was a politician. I follow the stock market. Not that I have any investments or stocks or shares. And I'm seeing a lot of parallels with the financial crash, with what's happening in professional sport, in this case football, but you could put any professional sport in place. You could argue rugby league's the same on a smaller scale. Within a week, I did the announcement, did my video on the French football, and within a couple of weeks, Lyon were buggered and Bordeaux go bust. And so I said, there's going to be a domino effect. Clubs will continue to have financial difficulties. Oh, Morecambe and Sheffield Wednesday this season, Reading, Derby, whatever. And it's going to continue to happen. The regulation is weak. There's enough money in the system for everyone to be profitable, but it's not being shared properly. There's a lack of transparency. There's a weak governance. And I was just it was mad. Yeah, I was. What is it? I was. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the Bundesliga, and of course, you've got the Bundesliga too. There are some Bundesliga clubs buying League One players. That's the level we've got to, where League One can offer bigger transfer fees than some Bundesliga and Bundesliga 2 clubs. And you have to remember the Bundesliga, the 50+1, the clubs sell out every game, weather permitting. Obviously, there's been some bad weather in Europe this winter, snow-wise. But I watched clubs like Holstein and VfL Osnabrück. I mean, I was born in Münster. They're in Bundesliga 2. Lived in Osnabrück. They're in Bundesliga 2. Holstein Kiel. We used to get the ferry from Hamburg sometimes if we couldn't get down to Zeebrugge or the Hoek of Holland. So my family's got a connection with that part of northwestern Germany. And when you've got really pretty stably run clubs, they're not struggling financially, but they're being outbid by League One sides in regards to player wages and transfers. That tells you something. That really tells you something. La Liga is riddled with financial problems. Serie A is riddled with financial problems. It's no secret whatsoever. There's clubs under investigations for criminal activity from their chairman and owners and sponsors. There's massive debt. And it's facts. It is facts. Like, the whole European Super League idea was all the clubs involved were riddled with debt. And it was a money-making scheme to try and get rid of some of that debt and balance the books. It had nothing to do with wanting to restructure the Champions League or anything like that. It was purely a money-making scheme. Oh God. You look at the bottom half of the championship. It's prime Premier League 90s, early 2000s. The clubs there, and then you look in League One. There's some Premier League clubs there. There's even ex Premier League clubs in League Two. Swindon and Bradford City, for example, have both been Premier League. It's ridiculous. You look at the Football League, and you look at all of them. Football League from League Two to Premier League. You could form two and a bit Premier League tables basically for the clubs that have played in the top flight since 1992. It's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. And look, Blackburn and Sheffield Wednesday have got their financial problems. As a Blackburn fan, I will admit that. But you look at the bottom half of the championship; they're all ex-Premier League clubs within the last 15 years. It's ridiculous. Apart from Sheffield Wednesday, it's ridiculous. I think it's just apart from Oxford United, it is madness. And then you look into League One and League Two, and there's ex-Premier League clubs there as well. There's even former Premier League clubs in the non-league. So there was. Oldham have got promoted, but it's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. And you've got to ask the question, when you've got some of these clubs outspending top flight league clubs in other leagues, that's showing a level of financial recklessness. It is financial recklessness. It shows the financial imbalance. And look, we obviously over the weekend we've heard that the NRL was sort of let slip that they are deals basically done with them investing in Super League. I think there'll be some conditions attached to that, but the NRL let it out the bag. They're going to basically be investing or buying a stake in Super League or whatever. Because the RFL have managed the game so badly over the last 2.5 decades that they need a bailout. And what I was saying to these two gentlemen, I forget the guy's name, the member of the House of Lords. I said it will happen, and I could say he could swap football for any other sport. It will happen, and you're going to see it has an economic impact in the sense that communities get impacted. So Sheffield Wednesday, for example, dropping down a level, that has an economic impact on the city because they're paying less wages to the players and the coaches. Tickets are worth less, so they're making less money. The size of clubs they'll be playing against, some of them are smaller, so they'll be bringing less fans. That's less capacity. And if the players are getting paid less, they're going to spend less in regards to housing, mortgages, all that kind of stuff. It does have a knock-on impact. And that negativity spreads throughout the city. Now, Sheffield United aren't doing particularly well themselves. Now, there was a boost in Luton, for example, in their Premier League season. There was a boost economically. It had an impact positively on the town. Bournemouth, there's been a boost to Bournemouth since they've been a Premier League club. The Premier League version of Netflix. Well, they're going to be trialing it overseas first. I think they need to bring it to. Well, you say we will get it, but the NRL website, which I use, which they advertise on Fox Sports for overseas fans, is not available if you're in Australia or New Zealand or the Pacific Islands. It's geo-blocked. So if they bring in this streaming service, I still think the domestic broadcasters may geo-block it. And so therefore you then have a access issue. Now, whether the Premier League go up, going to cut ties with Sky Sports, TNT, and then the free-to-air broadcasters with the FA Cup, we go, and football goes behind this streaming service. I think the Football League may also consider it as well. If it's a global thing, where it's at a set fee and it just depends on the exchange rate, how much you pay potentially. But I think in order for it to work, it needs to be made available to the domestic audience and not geo-blocked. And it needs to be at a reasonably affordable rate. I think the Premier League has realised the amount of illegal streaming. Fans aren't willing to cop the cost anymore. They're not willing to cop the extortionate prices the broadcasters are forcing them to pay. Even Amazon. Even Amazon. Amazon's not overly expensive on Amazon Prime, but it's another fee. They're not willing to continue forking out the money, and it's open the amount of social media posts I see harking back to the days when the Champions League and was on ITV and the Cup Winners' Cup and the UEFA Cup were on Channel 5 and BBC and all that, and making it accessible and making it affordable. Fans are starting to speak out in more ways than just protests at games. They're making it very public on social media that we're being ripped off and we've had enough. They're pushing back, and I think the clubs have got to realise there's only so far you can push your domestic audience before you start really feeling the pinch when loyal fans boycott games. You cannot rely on the plastic tourists and the wealthy, because guess what? There isn't enough of them. Empty seats look really shit for broadcasters. Plain and simple. That's why they try and hide them with lighting in stadiums and camera positioning. They try and hide the empty seats to sell the product. Well, you could argue you could have these behind the fly on the wall documentaries, but then Man United might become the biggest laughing stock on the planet if or Tottenham could. They're global brands. They obviously did. Some of these clubs did really well to brand themselves in the 90s. So you had the Invincibles of Arsenal, you had the Class of 92 of Man United. You've had the Abramovich era at Chelsea in the early days, with Mourinho with the special ones. They got it right, I think, with their marketing, just by how they did the build up to big cup games, Champions League. They really got it right in the 90s and the 2000s, which has obviously carried on to this day, even though some of these clubs really struggled. Arsenal haven't won many trophies since, even with the Wenger era, it sort of dried up. They haven't won a lot in a long time. They've won recently with some cup trophies. Man United haven't won the league since Fergie retired. Chelsea have been a bit of a basket case, up and down all over the place in recent years. But they got their branding right. They got their marketing right by using the managerial rivalries and the player rivalries to sell stuff, not only to the domestic audience, but the global audience. And it's not just Sky Sports ripping, but if Sky Sports struggles financially, other sports will be buggered. That's the problem. Same with TNT Sports, which was BT Sport, that's always lost money, but I think they've shot themselves in the foot. They're still losing money. I think the pay-per-view broadcasters have overcharged for too long, and they have to continue raising their prices because less people are paying. That's the problem. It becomes a vicious cycle where you're doubling down, and there's pushback. And look what happened with ITV Sport. Look what happened with Setanta. Premier Sports has had its struggles. But if Sky Sports does start financially struggling, or Sky starts financially struggling, that actually does have a negative impact, a consequence for other leagues. You look at Super League right now, they're trying to negotiate a new TV deal for next year. They need investment. Look at British ice hockey. Sky Sports pulled the plug on that 25 years ago, damn near killed the sport professionally in this country at a time when it started to grow. And it's continued to grow, but now we've got arena issues and availability. There's still money problems in the sport here. You look at cricket and the struggles it's faced since it's gone behind a paywall. Fans aren't happy with it. And now a lot of the county cricket clubs are using YouTube as a way to reach the audience that they've lost since, going behind a paywall. Rugby union is having its problems. But if Sky Sports does have a massive financial hit, it could be catastrophic for a whole host of sports. Whole host of sports could really suffer in a negative way. So be careful what you wish for. I think Sky, TNT, Premier Sports, whatever broadcasters, I think are realising that the pushback is there with the illegal streaming. and the fan anger is there, and you see on social media we're switching off. We're not interested in it. The quality's dropping. We're just you know not willing to pay it anymore. I think it's very obvious, very visible, and the criticism I think is valid. A lot of fans aren't happy with the structural broadcast changes on Sky and TNT with lineup changes to presenters. And when you've got Matt Letizia, I mean, he's been very critical of how they moved him on. He's not against, retiring from broadcasting and being told we're not going to renew your contract, we're going to go in a direction. But I think he feels the way it was handled at the time and how they just shuffled him out the door. But the BBC are finding that viewership is dropping off since the whole Gary Lineker and Match the Day and Football Focus with things by the DEI kind of narrative being pushed. You're causing your viewers to go, nope. Well, look, Altrincham is where they play ice hockey at the moment. Manchester's had a lot of issues with finances of teams and the arenas being suitable. But they might be building a new ice arena in Reading, at some point. I think there's a lot of proposals for that to occur. Where it happens in Reading, we'll wait and see. But that's been on the horizon for a while. Rumours are dangerous. If proposals are put forward, planning proposals, and they go, here you go, this is our plan for a development to build a state-of-the-art facility, then that changes the conversation. While it's just rumours and whatever, take it with a pinch of salt. Until arena plans are proposed, agreed upon, funding is agreed upon, and first they break ground. That's my opinion on things. We've seen this with stadium development proposals all over the world. Until they've actually broken ground and have started construction, it's not a reality. But then we've seen stadium construction like the Mestalla in Valencia. Jesus Christ. Will it ever get finished? They started that when I was a teenager. In 20 years, they've been dragging out the Mestalla development to replace the current stadium. Will they ever finish that? You look at Coventry's stadium, the plans changed and it became a financial noose around the neck of Coventry City. It destroyed Wasps financially. So even when a stadium is built, I mean, look at how long the FA built Wembley, took a long time, dragged on, and then they tried to sell it for half price. You look at Tottenham's rebuilt White Hart Lane, over budget, over time. You look at the issues Man United are having with the potential that their proposed stadium might not have, because obviously they want taxpayer-funded construction. You look at, I think, two stadiums that have worked out well is Man City with the Etihad, the former Commonwealth, and West Ham with the former Olympic Stadium. Although a lot of fans don't like that with the West Ham, with the seat lines and the view lines and the layout. They got a free stadium, basically. They got a very, very favourable lease. Man City worked out a really good agreement with the city, with Greater Manchester, to have the City of Manchester Stadium. And then the naming rights. I mean, Arsenal with the Emirates, they moved out of Highbury, had a plan, stuck to the plan. Okay, it cost them some on-field success. They won a lot less trophies, but they made sure that they were compliant, paid it off a long time ago. They had a very good financial structure in regards to paying the stadium off. And it wasn't over budget, it wasn't delayed. Now, they've had limited success since they played in the Emirates. 3 FA Cups, I think, and a couple of charity shields. But they were very, very prudent with their spending as a club. They balanced the books, made sure the books were balanced. and were very sensible with their spending. Now, if all clubs were like that, I think the Premier League would be far even more competitive than it actually is, and more balanced than it actually is. But it's taken a long time for Arsenal to be title contenders. It took them a very long time. That stadium's 20 years old since it opened. Been open 20 years this summer. And they took their time. They made sure they were, getting the stadium paid off. They were consistently top four, top five. So they're always in Europe. And they just were sensible with their spending. And it just shows when you're sensible with your spending, you don't win anymore. Money talks now, but then you look at the debts. I mean, Leicester, they overextend themselves. They win a couple of trophies, get relegated. And they're struggling as a result. They've become a yo-yo club again. Nottingham Forest had a good run last season, but again, they really blew the bank out. Gone through managers. The owner's a bit of a nut job, under investigation overseas for some criminal activities. They're not run sustainably. Whereas clubs like Brentford are run sustainably. They've built a new stadium. They've stabilised in the league. Obviously, they've still got to pay the stadium. I think they're slowly paying the stadium off. I would think if all clubs were like Arsenal and your Brentfords, for example, where they've invested in the facilities, yes. But at the same time, they're going to go, you know what? We're going to stabilise. We're going to pay this facility off, but it means we're going to be a bit less competitive, but still competitive, but we're not going to win as much. If every club was like that, by reining in their spending, I think the league would actually be more competitive and more fun. The players are still going to get paid the big wages, but the transfer fees are ridiculous. The agents' fees are ridiculous. I think if more clubs were a little bit more constrained in their spending, I think the league ultimately would be more competitive. Ironically, it'd be better. The league would be better. Yeah, look, I get you as a Cardiff fan, but Cardiff have been so badly run for so long by Vincent Tan. I really fear long term for Cardiff just not being stable. That's the fear. I mean, look at Exeter City. They've decided we're going to live within our means. We're going to have a small surplus. We're slowly going to improve the stadium. James's partner in Exeter. We're going to live within our means, but that means we've sort of got a ceiling unless someone comes in with investment but keeps the 50+1 rule where the fans are on the board and the fans have a stake in the club. Unless someone comes, if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would invest in Exeter City. I would. I think Exeter City deserves to be further up the footballing pyramid. They're one of the few clubs who actually operate at a profit, no loss. But in order to do that, they have basically said this is our limit at the moment, unless someone comes in with money, but has to respect the fact the fans have a fair stake in the club. They're basically the supporters' trust and the fans have to be involved in ownership. So Exeter City, I think, is a model. Exeter City is very similar to how Blackburn was run before the Venkies. And Blackburn were a very competitive club in the Premier League. They were making a profit every year. They were qualifying for Europe quite regularly. They won a League Cup under that ownership model after Jack Walker passed away. And I look at the club then, one of the few clubs in the Premier League making a profit and lowest season ticket prices at the time. That's where we were in 2009, 2010. That's where the club was at when the Venkies took over. Profitable, no debt, lowest season ticket prices in the league. Selling out every game to where we are now, it's a shambles. It's a shambles, honestly. And then I look at what's happening to Burnley now as well. It should not be allowed to happen. And unfortunately, the modern era, so the 90s onwards, and Europe is just as guilty of this as well. European clubs are just as guilty, and European leagues are just as guilty. I know Germany has the 50+1. I wouldn't say rule because it's not a rule. It's just culturally, for the most part. There's a handful of clubs that don't sort of follow the 50+1, but even then, the fans still have a big say in how their clubs are run. They still have fan representatives on the board and fan involvement. There's a handful of clubs that it doesn't exist, like Leipzig, but Even Bayern have said, yeah, we're willing to make less money to keep tickets cheap. The fact they've destroyed the German league is another thing. But Bayer Leverkusen proved that you can win, not called Bayern. Wolfsburg proved you can win, not called Bayern. But they've got big corporate backing. They still have the 50+1, but they've got big corporate backing, which German fans don't particularly like. They're not RB Leipzig, though. But even, Rummenigge, for example, and before him, Beckenbauer and other club representatives in the past and currently have said, no, we charge less for a reason. I think even Dortmund's CEOs might say, yeah, no, we charge less for a reason. We make it affordable. We make the fans involved because they are stakeholders. They are our customers as well as our stakeholders. They are involved in funding decisions and fundraising. I think the German model is the best model. You could argue Bayern have manipulated it in a way where they see good players at the club level to make sure that. But didn't help them. Was it the year before last when Leverkusen had their record-breaking season, which I don't think gets broken ever again. In regards to Vincent Tan, again, the director's test or fit proper person's test has proven itself with owners like Tan and the Venkis and ALK Capital with Burnley that it doesn't work. The situation with a whole host of clubs with bad ownership is reaching a level now where, we've had some bad owners pre-1992. There's no doubt on that. There were some pretty dodgy individuals who were involved in football club ownership before the digital satellite era, the modern era. I was reading an article about the Atletico Madrid president from back in the day who was a right nut job and, was a crook. But he was just allowed to get away with it for so long. Look what happened in Italy. That continues to happen in Italy and Spain. To a certain extent, France, Marseille in the early 90s. This is something that, and we've seen it in other sports as well. We've seen it in cricket and rugby league and rugby union and ISO. We've seen it in North America. We've seen it in Australia. We've seen it in motorsport. We've seen it in so many sports. The governance aspect is so poor. And clearly we are reaching a point where we have to start asking some very serious questions about the direction governance is taking, the lack of transparency, the finances. There's some sport has become a massive business. There's no doubt on that. But Jesus Christ, there's some eyebrows being raised and some questions that need to be asked. And I would say since about 2016, 2017, 2018, about this period onwards. So, the last decade or so, there's definitely been more fan-led protest movements and, demanding change. And definitely the protest movements, it's not just an English thing or a Scottish thing, they do have an impact. I think the governing bodies and the broadcasters have seen this. The sponsors have definitely seen it. It had an impact with the European Super League 5 years ago. Definitely had an impact then. It had an impact with the pay-per-view debacle during COVID for the Premier League, where fans just were illegally streaming and just flouting, going, wait, we've already paid for a subscription service. You're bombarding us with ads, and then you want us to pay again. Nope. We're not doing the pay-per-view. We don't like it, well, TNS is the new Saints, isn't it? And they're English. They're based in Westbury. But look, it doesn't matter. Barry Island, South Wales, isn't it? But there's definitely mobilisation within fan groups now to protest. I think it started with the anti-Glazer protests at Man United in the modern era, with fans protesting, organised protesting, and having a common goal. And ultimately, FC United of Manchester is the ultimate protest club, which has happened before in history. But there's definitely social media has definitely helped organise fan groups to protest and boycott and hold owners and the leagues to account. Um, you know, I think the fan feeling, for the most part, about Mason Greenwood, and I see it's very divisive online, but I'm going to say this: if you heard the audio and watched some of the video clips, you know, and if you are a defender of Greenwood, regardless of the legal outcome, because the case has been shelved, not completely ended, he can still be brought back to court, can still be investigated. It's one of those inactive investigations in the English legal system. If you are defending Mason Greenwood, I think you need to give your head a wobble. Personally, if you heard the audio and watched the video, you make up your own mind. But there's still so many who are like, I got off with it, let it move on. Well, no. Sadly, in a lot of cases in domestic violence of any kind, or just domestic abuse of any kind, be it emotional, financial, physical, the victim stays with the abuser. And it often has tragic consequences. Doesn't matter if it's a man beating a woman or a woman beating a man or same-sex partnerships. I think it's like 70% of cases they end up staying with. It's just staggering. It's like Stockholm syndrome. But honestly, I don't know how that audio video leaked. Unless I think she messaged someone, but it's damning. But if it got to a court of law, they'll go, it's circumstantial, it's been shared online, which then, prejudices, proceedings. Well, when you bash your missus, when you bash your missus up that much, and I think she actually posted on her Instagram story. I think she was feeling that desperate, she wanted to highlight it, and then she quickly panicked. I don't know. Look, it's the same as Stan. I mean, Stan Collymore had no defence with Eureka Johnson because he was an idiot in public, threw her down a flight of stairs. I think he was found guilty. I've never liked Stan. I've met Stan Collymore. Don't like him. He hasn't got a leg to stand on when talking about domestic violence and that kind of stuff, or just assault in general. Ain't got a leg to stand on because he did it in public, didn't he? He properly bashed her up. And I remember, again, going to that Liverpool game against Sheffield Wednesday. Of course, Sheffield Wednesday had been. He battered his missus in public and threw her down a flight of stairs. And he's just generally he's just not a nice person. Same with Sir Geoffrey Boycott. He got found guilty in absentia for domestic violence. He bashed his wife in France, threw her down some stairs, was pissed. Oh, well, I met him as a kid. I just didn't like him. Kids are very observant. I'm going to say this, and I will make reference to the fact that I did a members video on Friday discussing what's been going on to start the year. Friday morning, I woke up to the news that my cousin's got what looks like potentially terminal cancer, and she's got 2 young kids. Now, I will say this: they're about the same age I was when I met Stan Collymore and all the Liverpool and Sheffield Wednesday players back in '96. Kids are surprisingly a really, really good reader character. They're very resilient and they're very observant. That's what you've got to remember. Kids are very resilient, very observant, and they're kids are generally a good reader character. Generally, they're probably a better reader character than adults. I'm going to say that. So I remember very vividly after the game, trophy room, director's box, and you got to meet all the players after they come out the changing rooms, and shake hands and get autographs, and and I had my program with me and the tickets, and every single player passed it around. Both sets of players, they're all integrated. Yeah, we'll sign it. We'll all sign it. Every single player, both managers, they all, yeah, we'll sign that, no problem. And then you've got to be individual players, and you would be, and you know, I was a big fan of David James as a kid. I always liked David James, and he's a really nice guy. You generally, this is a nice bloke. You've got a good feeling that he generally cared about, meeting the fans and engaging with the community, and and he was very, very real nice. He was he's bloody tall. He's bloody tall man. And we're going around, and then met Ian Rush. It was Ian Rush's last season, I seem to remember. And then he meets Dan Collymore. And I think this was before the Eureka Johnson incident. This was roughly about the time of it. And he just got that, you're a knob. And as a kid, kids just say that, and I just didn't. I got that vibe. He wasn't particularly pleasant. And you meet, shaking hands with all the other players, and of course, getting things signed. And yeah, I just got that feeling. I just went, nah, not for me. And I'm 7 years old, and I'm going, nah, not for me. And I met McManaman, I met a young Robbie Fowler, and I think Fowler was on the bench that day. Well, look, I mean, I'm not a massive fan of Tyson Fury, but I think Tyson Fury was very. I mean, a lot of boxers struggle, of course. Tyson Fury obviously was very open about his addiction issues. Tyson Fury hasn't batted his misses in public. I'm not going to lie there. There's never been anything about Tyson Fury to say he's violent towards his wife or his kids. I just don't agree on some of his views on the role of women in society, and that's why I've got mixed views on Tyson Fury. Stan Collymore, we do need high-profile people, I think, to have the mental health conversation. I think that's vital, and as obviously Gary Speed is the famous example in English and Welsh football, and of course Robert Enke in German football was two high-profile examples. He died roughly at the same time. Yeah, and I look at ice hockey with a few players who've gone and sadly lost their lives with mental health as part of their early passing. And I'm going to be clear about this. I think Tyson Fury being very open with his drug and alcohol problems and then his depression problems. Ricky Hatton, and of course, sadly, we now know that Ricky Hatton did take his own life, which I hoped it wouldn't be the case, but it sadly was. We can disagree on certain views that people hold for cultural reasons or personal reasons. It doesn't mean I don't think Tyson Fury and Ricky Hatton obviously had drug problems as well, quite famously. Doesn't mean they can't be good advocates for men's mental health or physical health or well-being and social well-being, because they both are. Ricky Hatton was. Stan Collymore, again, it's the same with Paul Gascoigne, and I liked Gascoigne as a player, but again, it was very public domestic violence, and you can't excuse it, and he doesn't excuse it. But he's had massive substance abuse problems, and it's very sad what's happened to Paul Gascoigne. It is very sad. And again, that damages his credibility. If he hadn't have bashed his ex-wife, I think I would look on Paul Gascoigne a little bit more favourably and with a little bit more sympathy. Yeah, no, Gaz is a love-hate thing with me. I think with what we now know with how the media, again with the phone hacking and the stalking and hounding him, that bit got to me. I watched the documentary, I did, and it was very powerful. But the domestic violence, you can't. I mean, at that point, he was off his nut. At that point, he was genuinely not sober most of the time, and was generally paranoid. And you could argue that the drug addiction and the alcoholism had an impact there, and it does tend to be the case with that kind of thing. But they were hounding his family. They were hounding his close friends. They were doing some the whole thing was vile. What the newspapers did, and obviously, ultimately, he did come out in the Levison inquiry, and he was one of those really. It was staggering what came out in that documentary. But the domestic violence, unfortunately, that does happen with alcoholics a lot. I don't think alcoholics, mean to be violent to their loved ones, but it does happen. And I have a lot more sympathy for Paul Gascoigne than Stan Collymore. Stan Collymore was a vile human being. Gazza, I think, was not looked after right by the game and those around him. I think Paul Merson, when they were both playing at Borough, was like, yeah, this is madness. And Merson's relapsed a few times. And again, people seem to love slagging off Merson on social media. I think Tony Adams has done a lot of good things for not just athletes, but general people with his foundation, his addiction centre. I think he's done great things. But it sums up what football was like in the 80s and 90s. There was a big alcohol, partying culture. A lot of sports were like that. A lot of sports are still like that. Not as much. I think there has been a cultural shift in the last 20 years. But there's still you listen to a lot of the podcasts, and a lot of it is alcohol-based antics. And some of it you're going, Christ, it's like they treat every post-match weekend like a stag do, and every pre-season and post-season tour like a stag do. It's just like, no wonder, we get all these allegations of assault, domestic violence, drink drive. It's just, it makes you wonder, because these are a lot of mostly young men, very impressionable young men, a lot of young men who struggled at school, who may not have a skill to fall back on if the career doesn't pan out. They may struggle to find work. But yeah, they're blue collar, so blue collar workers are generally hard drinking, or they like a drink down the pub. And to be, working class, there's that kind of grit kind. If you've got to stand up for yourself, you're going to have a few scraps in the school playground. You're going to have a few scraps on a Friday night. It's part of life. And yeah, I've had a few. There's going to be some bumps and bruises on the way. But the alcohol, and to a certain extent, the drug culture, God, if social media and camera phones were around 30, 40 years ago, bloody hell, it would have been a field day. But this is the setting that Gazza and Collymore had through their youth days into their early professional first team days. They were around this culture, and in Gazza's case, there is the bipolar aspect, and he's been diagnosed with that and treated for that, and that is a condition that I think is still not great in understanding. I think they're learning more stuff about it as time goes on. But I think he was a character in a good way. His teammates loved him. He brought fun to the group. He brought energy to the group. If players were a bit down, he would cheer them up just by being Gazza, just by being that bubbly kind of always. But it's the ones who are always up all the time, publicly around their friends, are the ones who are mostly struggling away from things. And he's Gaz is a very complex character. But then you look at Ricky Hatton's struggles, and it's very sad with his passing. You look at Tyson Fury, and I think Tyson Fury, as I say, I don't agree with everything he says. I don't agree with all his points of view, but he's allowed to have them. And I understand his cultural background, which is why he's been brought up with that way of thinking culturally, with his traveller background. And look, I've got traveller mates, so I understand that. And I personally don't agree with it, but live and let live. Let them live in their community and have their values. You could argue his values are a bit 1950s, but that's the upbringing he's had, and that's the values that he carries. But when it comes to the mental health and addiction aspect, I think Tyson Fury is a very good advocate for positive mental health and addiction help. And Tony Adams is another one. I do think that talking about Colin Moore being discussing it. Okay, I think he probably does feel remorse for the Eureka Johnson period. You could argue Eureka Johnson doesn't have the best taste in men, and that's a separate conversation to look at her relationship history, which is a car crash at the best of times. She seems to have a type, the bad boy type. But I think, I just not a fan of Stan Collymore. I'm not going to say you can't have a view on the mental health aspect and making sure it's better and better education and better discussion around it. I think we need that. I wouldn't have him as the spokesman though. I just think that Jeffrey Boycott as well. Unfortunately, for some reason, professional sport especially continues to welcome back individuals who are either drugs cheats, domestic abusers, like violent wife beaters, and persistent drink drivers. And the attitude is and that I think is an attitude that we need to start cleaning up sport, because that stereotype is out there that these are thuggish individuals, all of them. They're going to bash their wives, they're going to drink drive, take drugs, all this. And it's a minority of pro athletes that end up with the negative headlines. But then, oh no, Carragher, Mika Rich is most recently ripping him for being biased all the time as well. I don't like the video that I did back in the day when he got done for it. I don't condone the fact that he was being harassed and he reacted very poorly. It's not the first time he's lost control of his temper. The coin incident when he's playing for, forget who they were playing against, but he's playing for Liverpool. I forget who they're playing against, and he got coined. FA Cup game, a very angry FA Cup game. I think it was down in London. And it was either Spurs or Arsenal, if I remember. A coin's lobbed from the crowd. And it hits him, he threw it back. So he's got that temper in him. We've seen hot mics get people sacked, from Sky. I think that still gets brought up on social media now. But then Jeffrey Boycott kept his job on Test Match Special and on cricket broadcasts with domestic violence conviction. Let's just say that. So, look, I mean, Dean Saunders, got suspended for his drink drive conviction from TalkSport. I don't think he's actually back on TalkSport at the moment. I think he's done. I think Dean Saunders is, but I think he got stood down for a little bit, and considering how they dealt with Ron Atkinson and is it Andy Scott? I can't remember. Andy Gray, sorry, how they dealt with a few others. And Matt Letizia got booted out the door because of his views on vaccinations. His personal view on vaccinations and certain things that were going on at the time. So he's bloody lucky. I mean, Matt Letizia got, laid off for just having a viewpoint on forced vaccination mandates. Okay, Matt Letizia is a bit out there on some of his personal views, but he lost his job over it. Ron Atkinson got the sack immediately for the Marcel Desailly comments off camera. Andy Gray got, was a bit of a sleazeball. Yeah, so I don't know what the view, and of course management was different with Matt Letizia because the buyout of Sky B and the structural changes that Comcast brought in post 2021. So different management, different ownership of the broadcaster. We have to stress that. Pre-2021, different ownership with B Sky B, not Comcast, different management structure. So you've got to bear that in mind. Whether he would have, if that happened now, yeah, he's gone. But I don't know. I don't know. I think he was exceptionally lucky. In fact, he is lucky. He's not exceptionally lucky. He should have got sacked. But I think Dan Rowan should have got sacked for his comments outside Leicester City following the helicopter accident. I hate that video, mind. I think I could have dealt with that video better and done it better. It was very reactionary. I'm not a big fan of it. But I watched an interview with Martin Lawrenson the other day from last year, but it was on YouTube, and he's a very interesting character. I think he was, I think he sort of knew that at some point he had to hang it up. And he goes, Alan Hansen Alan Hansen got it right when he decided to call it a day when he did. But he was like, yeah, no, I was basically let go because I'm of a certain age, white, male. And he goes, that's why. It wasn't because I wasn't any good at my job or anything like that. They just moved me on. Laurie was a bit, yeah, not everyone's cup of tea with his sense of humour, but he did nothing wrong. I think it was a couple of moments I think he mentioned in his commentary career where he's like, I'm going to get pulled up for that. Well, can't, yeah. But he was like, he said he enjoyed his time at the BBC, but you notice as time went on, the management were getting a bit more biased politically, and it was just like, you know what, this is becoming less of an enjoyable experience. I think you got the hint from the interview I watched. He's like, it was sort of like the hint. This is not as much fun, and it just changed. And he was like, yeah. But Loro was all right. I think he got a bit of a raw deal. I think he should have left on his terms. Go, this is going to be my last year, basically. I think they should have let him go out on his terms. I think they mishandled that. The Gary Lineker stuff, I watched Gary Lineker's interview with James O'Brien on LBC just before this live stream, and that was quite telling. And actually, when it came to his social media stuff, Gary Lineker, I think, was harshly treated as well with the first one, because initially it was only those in the political and current affairs that were told you have to be impartial, so the newsreaders and those doing Panorama and Newsnight and stuff. And then one day he got pulled up for something, one of his posts on Twitter, and he goes, well, you've moved the goalposts. It's not in my contract. And that was very interesting how now he's left the organisation, how he can say, well, actually, the BBC moved the goalposts as time went on and didn't really have a policy on social media use, apart from if you're in news and current affairs, you've got to be neutral. Everyone else can have a viewpoint, and then it changed. And you've moved the goalposts, not us. And the second time, I think but I think again the BBC handled that poorly. Look, I don't agree with everything Lineker says politically, but he's allowed a viewpoint. I think we've reached a point now where we're so politically divided. I don't know how we can heal as a society. I think, but I've become less. I've reached a point politically now where, Christ, I would vote for military dictatorship at this point because I've just had enough. I don't trust. Politics is just a mess. There's no trust for them. I would rather have a bloody autocratic government at this point. Have the military in charge. But no, jokes aside, and that's as political as I'm going to get, I've reached a point now where I've lost faith in the system. We've seen how the DEI kind of narrative is backfired on broadcasters. And when you've got respected sports journalists going, yeah, it's going down a way we don't like, and the viewership figures back that up. The viewership figures are telling. I didn't think the Olympics was that bad. I think they could have done a bit better with some of the broadcasting. but I don't think it was that bad. But you can definitely see a trend now, and I think the viewership figures will back up that that trend we've seen over the last decade or so. I think about 2015, 2016, though, that it just, you, as a young man at the time, a young white man, and I will say this, but, you know, demographically, young white men are most likely to feel socially excluded and struggle most at school. So, I mean, I'm now middle aged now. I mean, I'm nearly 37, so I'm closer to 40 than I am to 30. But I remember about a decade ago, in my late 20s, just before I started with this channel, I started to notice a change in the mid 2000s, and it's become very noticeable. And they've gone down this DEI path, and it's definitely that the quality of sports journalism has declined, especially on the TV. The quality of productions is not as good. The quality of commentary and punditry is not as good. The quality of presenting is not as good, as a general rule of thumb. And it's very noticeable that there is a decline there, and it's. I don't know how you reverse that trend. Then they're not promoting on ability; they're promoting on ethnicity or gender or age rather than ability. No, I think there's truth to that. I generally think there's truth to that. Uh, I can't see that we're being nostalgic, because you can call out. We had some really good, and we still do have some really good female pundits and presenters. And Sue Barker is exactly the same in regards to Gary Lineker and Mark Lawrenson. And she felt, she openly said, no, it wasn't that I was leaving on my terms. They just basically gave me the boot because I was old and white. I wasn't. I was a woman, but it wasn't the right woman. I think Claire Balding and Hazel Irvine and Gabby Logan will probably be the next batch that get shuffled out. I really do. I'm surprised Claire Balding didn't present the Winter Olympics. I mean, the young woman who was doing it was fine. Don't know who she is. I don't feel that. Okay, you've come from a sporting background. You've gone into journalism, which Claire Balding did, which Sue Barker did, Gabby Logan did. They all had sporting backgrounds before getting into sports broadcasting. That's what made them good at what they did. Is they had an idea what the athletes were going through. They had an idea of the sacrifices you have to make and the training. And Hazel Irvine, I think, just has a journalistic background, but I think they're next. I think they're the next ones out the door. I genuinely do. And I mean, look, Claire Balding comes from an equestrian background. Gabby Logan comes from a gymnastics background, and her dad was a football player. Her husband's a former rugby international. Yeah, I think she's qualified to talk about sport because she's lived and breathed it her entire life. Sue Barker was obviously a professional tennis player. So yeah, I think they're more than qualified to talk about sport. They've lived and breathed it their entire adult lives. In fact, Gabby Logan, her entire life. Claire Balding, her entire life. No, her dad was Welsh. She qualifies for Wales I think she competed at the Commonwealth Games as a Welsh athlete because of her dad. Matt Barker, former gymnast as well. There you go. There's another one. On the One Show, Matt Barker used to be on Blue Peter, was a former gymnast. You don't see Matt Barker much these days, as much, but they're genuinely. I think the quality, and I think a lot of it's editorial as well and production, and they're saying this is what they're getting a little bit more. You can't say these things in commentary. You can't. Honestly, I remember. I forget there was an advert and it was like Mark Maloney's turn on a 50p piece thinner than a cigarette paper when Mark Malone was bursting. That was in the 90s. Can't say that now. Smoking, no, not fashionable. oh no, you can't. I've started smoking again. Sod it, I'm stressed. But it's serious. I'm being generally serious. I think that there's got to be a editorial, and from the top of the organisations, this is what we're striving for here, and it's biting the broadcasters in the arse. It genuinely is. And then I look at the Australian broadcasters. It's good. It's nostalgia, all right, because they've got female presenters, and pundits and all that. But they all come from rugby league backgrounds when it comes to rugby league coverage, or they come from AFL backgrounds, either through relatives or being involved in an initiative. They're fans of the sports, and it works. It just works. The rugby league coverage is, the sports coverage in Australia in general, but the rugby league coverage, because I follow that much, and a bit of the AFL, is so superior to the crap we have here. It's like going back 20 years in time. But yeah, no, Jake Humphries never did it for me. Look, he's still decent at what he does. He's just not on the same level of what went before. But I think in order to fill the Des Lynams, the gap of like the Des Lynams and the Steve Ryders of being the face, or the Murray Walkers, and being a very recognisable face or voice behind, the sports presenting. Frank Boff, people were like, you're never going to replace Frank Boff. No, you had Steve Ryder and Des Lynam really filled that gap very quickly, that Frank Boff was very quickly forgotten about. And the ratings actually improved. Let that sink in. I think Jake Humphrey had some very big shoes to fill when, certain other presenters stepped aside or changed broadcasters. What's his name? Ray Stubbs. Yeah, the viewing habits did change. They did, but I think the red button, and the being able to have a smart TV, I think they did. I think they really cut back on that stupidly when they should have invested in it more. Grandstand was massive, and I think Grandstand could have worked as a format with the red. But if they had invested earlier in the red button and in the digital switchover. And my grandparents didn't know how it worked. I had to show them. It was really entertaining, and it was funny. But I think Grandstand could actually work now as like a YouTube channel with multiple kind of sports going on, or as an option. I think it could work. They could bring it back, but I think they fouled that one up quite badly by not future-proofing it, by looking at what was coming and going, right, we can have multiple sports streams where you can hit the red button. Could have worked. I think you would have to tweak the format of the thing, but I think that could have worked as like a sports channel. Could have worked, or a sports network or Grandstand. I think could have worked. I do, just to cover my arse, but less and less people are. I just cover my arse with it. Just I pay. I get my letter every year. I can't remember my online account. I just pay. It's on a direct debit. It's all right. By actually paying, it actually helps my credit rating. So, but I understand why people don't. I understand people trying to find loopholes in it when it comes to streaming and all this. I think it's going to go. I can't see it being sustainable. I think it's going to go. I think the BBC is going to have to go to a commercial only. I don't think a streaming or put it behind a paywall is going to save BBC. I think they're going to have to go on an advertising model. But we'll we'll see what happens in the end. ITV being bought out by Sky, but ITV has to stay free to air. That's important. It's part of their charter. Um, can't go behind a paywall. Even though ITV actually have the option to have a premium subscription, so you pay not to have ads, which I thought they weren't allowed to do, but apparently they are. Used to be ITV Hub. I think it worked better as ITV Hub. ITVX is the rebrand. It doesn't work as well. Yeah, I only watch the sport on the BBC. I don't watch anything else. I honestly think we've reached a point now where the discussion needs to be had. Where we're at with broadcasters and media rights and streaming services. I just watch online on the sport. I actually haven't really watched for the best part of 6.5 years. I've watched a handful of things on the telly, a lot of repeats. I personally haven't gone, I'm watching that tonight. My TV hasn't even plugged in. Not that I actually ever watched TV on that. I actually used to stream through my Xbox before. I haven't personally decided I'm going to watch on the TV for. I think the last thing I actually personally went, I'm deciding to watch this on the telly was the 2020 FA Cup final, which was a few days before I moved to this current apartment. So, but I honestly think, yeah, there's times have changed. Times have changed. Viewing habits have changed. Demographics have changed. Accessibility has changed. What people are willing to pay has changed. A lot of things are different now than what they were 5 years ago. I think COVID as well. I think the pandemic changed a lot of stuff. Big changes socially. Spending habits, a lot's different now than what it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever you want to pinpoint a moment. I mean, I'm 37 this year. 20 years ago, I left school. Left school 20 years ago, which still amazes me that it's been that long, 2 decades. Doesn't feel like it, but that was the thing. And that was the Germany World Cup. That's how long ago that was. No, sometimes a lot of the time it's I'm in a very male-dominated environment, so we're less likely to talk about it. Only a handful of female staff on my contract, so I think at the moment we've got 2. One is the admin, and one is one of the we have 2. We used to have more, but they've left for different reasons. One got sacked. One just became self-employed with her dad, so he, became a tradie. No, there hasn't been I mean, I've normally been in male-dominated workplaces, factories, warehouses, farms, things like that. I don't know. They might move on to again streaming services. It's more of a. I will say this: I never really enjoyed them. I was more into sitcoms, if anything. And I think that's changing now. I don't think we've got a dominant sitcom with a live studio audience. That's changed. But viewing habits have changed, and that's been borne out with sport as well. Again, I'm going back to the cost of the streaming services and the TV sports rights. There's been pushback, so I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But again, socially, the work environment I'm in is it's very male dominated. And a lot of the conversations about the sport, doesn't matter if it's rugby union, rugby league, cricket, golf, darts, snooker, football, bit of the Olympics here or there. So it's the conversation about did you watch the football last night? Did you watch the rugby last night? Did you watch the cricket? Did you get the golf, the dart? That's basically what the conversation's about. there's not a lot of conversation about, oh, did you watch EastEnders last night? No, not a thing. At least, um, I think we are starting to see some pushback against. I mean, the irony is we are on social media right now. We are starting to see a little bit of pushback in that regard. I look, the fact I've got very few, younger viewers between the ages of 13 and 17 anyway. They never have made up any large viewership. And what's really interesting is I think it's the 45 to 55, is it, 50, 54 to 60, no, 55 to 64 age group has got the highest percentage of views so far this year. I've got, it works like 13 to 17, 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and 65 plus. That's the age demographic breakdowns. And at the moment, the 25 to 34, so and the 54 to 65 demographics are the highest for viewership. They're the two highest. And it's the older demographic that's actually higher at the moment. I'm also now in the 35 to 44, and I switched over a year or so ago. It's weird, being in that demographic, but 37 this year. I'm 36 now. It's age is starting to catch up with me. I'm feeling it a little bit more the last, that's about mid. That's about mid. That's middle of the pack. That's middle of the pack. I'm starting to feel it a little bit though. I'm being honest. I'm actually the last few months. It's dawned on me that at the moment I'm in a bit of a, I'm like shit. I'm feeling aches and pains a little bit more, but I'm actually emotionally, I'm like, it's got to me a little bit. I'm not getting older as such, but things have got to me. I think it's not just that. I'm 36 and I'm still figuring life out. That makes sense. It took me until my late 20s, early 30s to go, right, I've got a bit of direction with this and I'm stable in work. But I'm in my late 30s now and I'm never going to be able to own a home unless I win the lottery. But no, things have got to me, the last few months. Honestly, the last, I'm going to say 5-6 months, things have started to get to me a little bit. The mental health's getting to me a little bit. And generally, I'm not where I want to be mentally. Oh, God, we are, yeah. I mean, we are. We're going to. No, but generally speaking, jokes aside, mental side of things, and I'm always banging on about this. Lately, it's been tough. I've just really struggled. I think the weather's had a little bit to do with it, but it has been not. It's been tough. Been very tough. I've just been honest. It's not been an enjoyable few months really. Christmas, New Year at work just flat out exhausted me. Just took it out of me. That was just exhausting. But no, it's been a tough start of the year. It was a tough 2025, I think. It definitely was a tough 2025. I'm not hiding away from that. It was a tough time last year. Channel did all right though. That's important. The channel did all right. That's okay. But no, it was a very, very. No, I don't. It's not that I don't like winter. If it snowed all the time, I'd have loved it. It's just, I'm going to say the last year and a half, while the channel's done really well, this first 2 months of the year has been a bit dead, but I haven't really been uploading. Am I finding time going fast or not? I think that's a kind of a mind trick the mind plays. I don't think it's going faster or not. I just think lately, I've just mental health has just gone down. It's just struggling. I'm just generally. I've reached a point now where I'm like I'm nearly 37. Figure it out. I don't think we ever figure life out really. I really don't. Um, I'm just a little bit at the moment a bit lost. There's a lot going. There is a lot going on. I'm not going to go into everything that's going on, but you know, Friday morning, waking up early hours Friday morning to find out my cousin, who's only 38, so I'm 36, not a year and a half, 2 years older than me, has a very rare aggressive form of cancer that looks very likely to be terminal, basically. Even with treatment, the side effects, it's just basically the family is trying to share a GoFundMe page, and we're trying to raise money to basically make her life a bit more comfortable and for the meds, and so she can spend more time with her kids, basically. I've got ADHD, mate. It's fine. Fine. I've got ADHD. It's fine. But no, honestly, waking up the news Friday morning that my cousin's got terminal cancer is, well, basically, it's highly likely to be terminal cancer is just shit. She's got two young kids. She's 38. Like that's the one that gets to me. It's not that she's got cancer and it happens, but yeah, and she hid it, or she kept quiet about it, kept it close to, I think, her sisters, you're my cousin, and her brother kept it a little bit in house, which I think is fair. I think that's fair to the immediate family. I don't know when in 2012, from 2025 she was diagnosed, but it's not looking good. Say that. And then I read up a little bit, and it's the recovery rate. It's just 10%. So yeah, that just tops off a very shit start of the year. Very shit start of the year. So I was meant to do some content yesterday and today. I was going to cover the NRL games in Vegas, and I just went yesterday. I was like, you know what, I don't want to. I generally felt like a sack of shit. And I was just like, yeah, I'm just not here today. I just tuned out yesterday. And today, I've nodded off a few times. I missed the odd few minutes where I just shut my eyes, but I had the background going and I wake up. And like, so I know the results of all the games, but today I just felt the same. Like I'm generally like, I have a good relationship with my dad's family and my cousins on my dad's side. I think we all do. I think we all do. We all get on, my cousins. We all have a good laugh when we do meet up. But because we're spread out all over the southwest of England, southeast, Midlands, New Zealand. Yeah, I've got family overseas. It is tough sometimes to keep all in contact. And so we can't see some of us can't. It's tough, and so we can't always catch up when we want to and see each other when we want to. It's tough, and so my cousin Lisa's going through cancer diagnosis, and we're not sure what the outcome's going to be, but I fear it's terminal. My cousin Erin has suffered greatly with her mental health over a significant period of time, and has had health issues. I'm not sure she's had a knee replacement yet. She needs a double knee replacement, and which is never good. One of my other cousins, later in life got diagnosed with ADHD, like me and my sister, and has been open about and more open about her addiction issues. she's doing great now. She's doing a good thing. She's done a psychology degree later in life and is really helping predominantly women, but those who are diagnosed with ADHD and ADD later in life, like myself and my sister. She's doing a lot in the psychology realm now. I think through a charity, but she's gone through a tough time, and unfortunately for my cousin Donna, that was alcohol was her way of dealing with things. My sister's had an ADHD diagnosis. I've had an ADHD diagnosis later in life, which is difficult to process. But it does explain a lot. So yeah, I think, but as cousins, I think we do. When we all talk to each other, we have a laugh and we, support each other in our choices. Um, so yeah, it's um I forget what ASD is. I know ADD is attention deficit disorder and ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But what is ASD? Oh, I'm gonna. Hang on. I'm gonna be lazy. I'm just gonna look it up. Sod it. I can't be asked. This is also okay. Okay. I get you. I think that covers like ADD and ADHD and a few other bits and pieces. Basically, you're just a bit more. If I can remember, it's a bit more shy and a little bit more cautious in public, and a bit more. It's a little bit harder to build trust, I think, and yeah, you're neurospicy. We're all ADHD is on the same thing. It's fine. Nothing to be ashamed. What's scary, and what I think is very interesting, I think everyone's on the spectrum a little bit. Just gonna put it out there. I think we're all a bit neurospicy. Good way to look at it. I am me. Quite honestly, I think this is why I think my live streams work so well because there's never one point. I've got. Yeah, I was like that once, and then I've got a little bit as I've got older. I think, yeah, I was very, very. Oh, Datesy, I think. Oh, Christ, shit. For me, I've got to be interested in the subject if there's a date involved or a fact involved. History and geography, for example. Christ, that's fucking scary. That generally is terrifying. That you know my birthday. It's weird. Um, that's how are you not Rain Man? Can you be my accountant? Can we come up with some Ponzi schemes so we can retire? That's generally worrying. But at the same time, I mean, yeah, no, but that obviously sticks in your mind. You're good at numbers, so I was never good at maths. I hate math, but you're good at numbers, so you're very. I'm assuming you did quite well at remembering things like dates and facts. You could be very good as a researcher. Ironically, I mean, I love reading and I love finding out stuff and discovering things. I like my history. I like my military history especially, and I like my sort of like in what the hell is PD? We are now getting into some really weird. There's just letters. I don't. I'm assuming that's physical development disorder. I don't have a fucking what is yeah. No. We're gonna go and use search engine, which also owns YouTube. Pervasive developmental. Oh, it's the same thing. ASD. It's just ASD. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Um, It's exactly the same thing. Uh, oh, I'm flapping wrong. What the fuck? Huh. Long-term low-level mood. Um, yeah, PDD is exactly the same as ASD, by the way. Just going to put it out there. It's just a different name of it from a different time. Uh, how bizarre. Apparently, all my audience are all neurospicy. It's really fucking weird. It's really weird. No, but I got diagnosed with ADHD in 2021, and it was just before my 31st birthday. No, 30. No, I was 31. It was just before my 32nd birthday. So 5 years. 5 years ago. Yeah. 5 years ago, at the end of the year, I got diagnosed. So 2021, I got a diagnosis. My sister got a diagnosis, I think, 2 years ago. My cousin got a diagnosis 3 years ago. And because of my diagnosis, I obviously mentioned that I had this, and obviously my cousin saw that, and we had a discussion, and then it sort of became a discussion. So when my sister was going through her diagnosis process, I said, talk to this cousin, and it was a bit weird how three of us in the space of one after the other in the space of a couple of years were going through the same process for different reasons, man. There were different reasons why we were all going through the diagnosis process. No, I don't think so. There's a couple. There's a couple people I work with who there's definitely got it and are in don't realise. I think everyone a bit like that. I honestly do. I think everyone's a bit like that. It is nice to have a just a hangout bit. I mean, it's sometimes nice to get off. Talk about sport all the time just gets a little bit monotonous. It is kind of nice sometimes to have a break. Um, Kind of refreshing, I think, a little bit. I think it is kind of refreshing. Yeah, I will call it a stream in a minute because I've got to be up at 3 in the morning. But yeah, no, it is kind of refreshing sometimes just to talk about different subjects and different things. And I do have the other channel which I haven't posted on in a while. I think I need to look at the history of Boffin and do a bit more content on there. And I could discuss what's going on in the Middle East, and I could discuss what's happening in the US and Mexico. But I wouldn't say it's too much. It's like I just at the moment, the weather, as I say, the weather's not been great. I've not really had a great time of things the last few months. It's been a bit of a grind, and there's burnout's definitely a thing. I need a break. The earliest I can take any time off work is April. And so I think I'm going to take a week in April off. I'm just gonna fill the holiday forms in, start breaking up I need to have some time off for my tooth extraction. So I'm going to book 3 weeks off and have that other week free for when I know when I do have dentist. I've got to work the Easter period. The overtime is generally handy to have that mucho denario because we get paid extra. And of course, this year we've got so many changes happening with the work contract. So there's a lot of unknowns. Apparently, this month I'm going to have meetings with the new company. So there's only one tooth that's got to come out. I might have to have two out, but I think it's only the one. But it's been all right. A little bit of pain every now and then, but it's been all right. Bleeding sort of stopped, so it's mostly all the way through the gum now. It's just about the angle it comes through, and I've heard nothing from dentists since the X-ray, so who knows what's going on. I'm going to chase them up at some point, and just see where we're at and what's happening there. But it is what it is. No, it's not. I mean, I've had a fractured cheek before, a little fracture in here, and I had a bit of a playing rugby and all that, and then I had an infection in part because of the damage to my cheekbone. Didn't have a plate. I should have had a plate put in, but I decided not to go to the hospital. I just started playing rugby, bashed up, sod it. I'll just let it heal. So I've got a bit of a lump on my left cheek. My left cheek is not the same as my right. My nose is also wonky as well. So I've had a few bashes to the head over the years. But I tend not to avoid going to hospital and doctors if I can. I'm starting to regret some of my decisions over the years. I think I should have taken. I think there's something else that this is where I have sympathy for athletes who can push themselves to their late 30s, early 40s. I generally do have sympathy for them at this point, where they're able to stay at a high level until their late 30s, early 40s, because they go through a lot more wear and tear on the body than your average person. Although some of the jobs I've done have been pretty physical. But how they can do that. I mean, unless you're staying very injury free. Jesus Christ! I mean, some of the abuse their body takes. I'm surprised some of them can make it to their late 30s and 40s. But as professional athletes, it's brutal on the body. I mean, I'm feeling it, and I'm 36 and he's 37, and I'm starting to feel. I'm going to be 37 in December, so I've got a while. I've got 10 months to my birthday, but I'm feeling it. Yeah, Djokovic, Federer's another one. Nadal, Murray's a little bit older. He's only recently retired. Djokovic is the one that's like, okay, he's giving it a good crack at his age, but notice he's not winning Grand Slams anymore. He's starting to decline. Well, Marnonu, he's like 43 now. He's really gone on for a while. I think he plays a bit more protected minutes, though. I don't think he's playing a full 80. But then I look at Daly Cherry Evans in for the Sydney Roosters. Obviously, we're making his first grade NRL debut this weekend. He's the oldest active player. I think he's 37, just turned 37. You've got Adam Reynolds and Ben Hunt are both 36. Who's the South Sydney player who's 36? There's a handful of players at my age or older in the NRL. This I think it's 4 of them this coming season. The sport they play amazes me. In the NHL, there's a handful my age or older in the NHL. I mean, as I say, it amazes me that in the NRL there are 4 players my age or older active for this coming season. Now, Cherry Evans is on a 2-year contract. We know Reynolds is going to retire in the season. Cody Walker, I think this is going to be his last year, most likely, although we don't know. He hasn't confirmed or denied. And Ben Hunt says he might re-sign for another year. So we'll see in regard to the elder statesmen in the NRL. But you've got Ryan Hall for the Leeds Rhinos. He's at that sort of similar age now. Yeah, no, I've not watched a single bit of the Six Nations this year. Again, I've reached a point where I'm just feeling a little bit burnt out. I know they generally the Six Nations reviews generally do well. I just haven't had any. I've just really been just struggling. This February's been terrible. January wasn't great either. I'm feeling it after Christmas, New Year. Not been well to start the year. I've had 2 viral chest infections. Well, viruses, flu kind of thing. I've had issues with my wisdom tooth, which have not been great. Well, it's been all right lately. So I'm just generally feeling run down, rough, basically. But yeah, France, I think, are going to win it. Scotland, again, in that inconsistency, although they're starting to Italy defeat some worrying signs. Then they beat England. Make it. Ireland, not again. Ireland have started to become a little bit inconsistent. Italy, I think, are there or thereabouts. They're just I think they've got a good chance of potentially beating England. Wales are just the whipping boys. Let's just be clear on that. Wales are in serious trouble. Wales are in serious, serious trouble. Doesn't matter who the coach is. There are serious issues with Welsh rugby. And going into the World Cup next year, I cannot see them addressing them in that time, in the 18-month window that they've got. I think Steve Borthwick is on borrowed time as well. They did, but they're not winning games. Let's be honest. They're not coming close to any of it. They are tailed off. They are in serious trouble. Scotland are inconsistent. We know that. We know what we're going to get with Scotland. They can be brilliant one week and crap the next, and mediocre another. England have got problems, and I think they've been exposed. And I think Steve Borthwick, their away form in the Six Nations is not great under Steve Borthwick. That's a definite concern in this World Cup cycle. Yes, we've got 18 months or so, 19 months or so. It's a concern. Massive concern. The results have not been great. They're in trouble. Italy have a very good chance of doing a number on them. That's the box that the Italians are left to tick. Once the Italians tick that off, their development, okay, they didn't quite get over the line against the French, which was disappointing. But they put up a good fight. They obviously beat Scotland and played well. Wales are in a mess. It's financial, it's structural. It's a mess. Whether football was more important or not, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. They were in trouble before the Wrexham effect. Just going to be honest there. The clubs were in trouble. Provinces, should I say? The domestic game was in trouble with the clubs. The national side was in trouble before the Ryan Reynolds, Ryan McElhinney Wrexham story takes place. The signs were there before the 2019 World Cup. So this is not a new thing. This has been happening. This is a long-term issue. So it's a thing. It's a long-term issue of mismanagement, financial mess, decline, and no direction. It's the governance side as well. There's a lack of direction, and that's hurting the prospects for the national team. It's just chronic. But rugby union, I think, has been mismanaged financially since professionalism. Rugby union's a weird one because of how the international game is structured and how it works compared to football. Because football has tournaments, Euros and World Cups, or Copa Americas and World Cups on a cycle where we have the Six Nations every year, summer tests, autumn tests, repeat cycle, World Cup every 4 years. Other than that, it's regular tournaments. Six Nations or Rugby Championship, summer or winter tour depending on Northern and Southern Hemisphere, autumn or spring tour depending on Northern and Southern Hemisphere. So you have your windows. You have your tournament window, touring window, cycle for 3 years. The fourth year is a World Cup. So the way they structure the international game is different to international football, where rankings go up and down with more regularity than what we see with the ranking system in rugby union, which is flawed, in my opinion. Is it bad for rugby if Wales are shit? Well, Scotland have been shit for a long time until recently. Italy was shit for a long time until recently. So make of that what you will. Make of that what you will. But the conversation of relegating a team out of the Six Nations and replacing with Georgia or Romania or Portugal have died down because it's Wales at the bottom, not Italy. But I can't see Wales. No, because Italy were a lot worse than Scotland when Scotland were really bad. But Scotland and Italy, I think, are better than if you look how bad, I think Wales are actually worse than what Italy and Scotland were at the same point. Because Italy, outside of the Six Nations, could win Test matches at World Cups and summer and autumn Test series, whereas Wales aren't doing that. They've won, I think, like what 2 matches or something in like 3 years. I think Wales are actually worse than when Italy and Scotland were at their lowest, and where France were really struggling, and England have had their struggles at times. Ireland have had the. This is I think the worst tier one nation we've ever seen because their class is tier one. We've never seen some. Even Italy weren't that bad with consecutive losses. Like you could not make this up. This is historically bad. That Wales have lost more Test matches in the last two and a bit years than Richie McCaw did in his entire professional career as an All Black. And New Zealand lost a fair few Test matches when Richie McCaw was a professional. Didn't play all of them though. But as Test matches that Richie McCaw played, he's lost less Test matches than Wales in the last 2-3 years. It's not that they lose games, and it's the manner of the defeat, but it's also you've got to look at the structural issues. You've got to look at the structural issues that have been in place for a very long time and haven't been addressed. And they go back 8, 10, 20, they go back to the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. This has not happened overnight. This has not just happened in the last couple of years because of the pandemic. This is structural, institutional. They got lucky that they had a generation of players in the 2000s and 2010s that were that good. They papered over some of the cracks of player development and pathways. Yeah, the fact they can't even decide, is it 4 regions, is it 3, is it 2, are we merging, are we bringing a 5th one in? They don't have a clue what they're doing. There is no direction. There's consultation after. I don't understand. There's no direction here. There is none. The selection rules where you've got to play in Wales after 25 caps are killing the game. I think they're archaic. Their protectionism never works. It's like putting tariffs on. It doesn't work. It hurts you. You've got to allow the Welsh players to play in France, to play in England, play overseas. So I don't know. It's just a mess. There's not enough money in professional sport in Wales anyway. Is football the dominant? I don't know, but football generally has wealthy owners backing clubs like Snoop Dogg involved with Swansea now. Money. You can argue about Vincent Tan, his good and badness for the game. Money. Wrexham, Reynolds and McElhinney. And then Newport is the one with the weakest finances, but they've still got a bit of money behind them. It genuinely is that the rugby union regions can't get wealthy backers to come in and go, we'll take up some of the financial slack to invest, grow the game, stabilise, because there's actually less risk in rugby union than football because there's no relegation. So it's a safer investment. I'm surprised the North Americans haven't gone, oh yeah, we'll pump up millions and billions into rugby union. England are in trouble as well. I think ring fence in the Premiership is just going to be, they're franchising it. It's going to kill them. We'll see what happens with the other clubs, but we will see. But Swansea already had American owners before Snoop Dogg got involved. He's a part owner. He's not a full owner. Wrexham, they're in partnership. Ryan Reynolds has looked at other sporting ventures as well. I think Rob McElhinney has looked at other sporting ventures as well. The interesting thing is they are stakeholders. They're not outright owners. They own a stake. But it's extra investment. And therefore, because they're high profile, creates further interest. And it starts to domino effect for other clubs. So I wouldn't be surprised if keeping up with the Joneses, Cardiffs, your Newports, they go, can we have a bit of money as well? And other clubs in the Football League go, can we have a bit of interest, please? And it can snowball from there. Anyway, I'm going to call that a stream. I've been going for nearly 4 hours. It's not the longest stream we've ever done. But I'm going to call it a stream. I've got to be up early in the morning. I've got to put dinner on, have a quick bite to eat. But yeah, thank you for your questions. It was nice that we sort of segued a little bit off from sports talk the entire time. I will finish on this. We'll keep an eye on the Iran situation and the Mexico situation because that does have World Cup implications, linking it back to sport. But I think we need to keep an eye on that because, yeah, a ballistic missile can hit us. So let's just say that. As a Brit, a ballistic missile can hit Western and Northern Europe from Iran. That's the thing. So, yeah, I don't want to wake up in the morning with a hole in the ground outside my flat because that can generally happen. But I talking about what's going on. If Iran do decide to withdraw, the UAE would, as been discussed, would fill the gap. Mexico, that's a bit more problematic because infrastructure. But there were other US cities that put in bids to be host cities who were overlooked. So if it gets a bit tasty in Mexico, I don't know what would happen because they're co-hosts. If they pull out, who would you get in from the North American CONCACAF Confederation to fill the gap? Would it be Jamaica? Would it be Trinidad? Would it be, I don't know if Honduras qualified or would it be one of the Central American? It gets very interesting. This World Cup just looks a bit cursed to me. I have genuine concerns about the quality we're going to see on the field, the attendance, and whether nations are going to pull out or not, and all the political ramifications that are going with it. I genuinely think we'll see. Like, I'm not against expanding tournaments and growing games and increasing sport participation. We are going to see some players that we're going to have no idea who they are, and they're going to really shine. Like Uzbekistan. I don't know any Uzbek. I think I know one Uzbekistani player plays in the Premier League. I think. We're going to see some diamonds in the rough. Some unknown talent is going to put themselves in the shop window. We're going to have some feel-good stories from this World Cup, I have no doubt, where underdogs do well. I think there's a bit more jeopardy to it. I genuinely do. But I am concerned about, the viewership, the fans in attendance, the weather conditions are going to have a part to play, as we saw at the Club World Cups, the weather delays, but also the violence in Mexico and the US and what's happening in the Middle East. That's things we've got to consider. And a lot of controversy about the ticket prices and policies and tariffs and all sorts. But then again, the crowd at the Vegas games and the fact that higher numbers this year than previous years for tickets sold and fan participation with the NRL Vegas games. So that didn't have as much of an impact, having the tariffs and costs associated. I wouldn't be surprised if in Vegas they drop the hotel prices to fill them because they've been struggling to get tourists into Vegas lately. It's been a drop off. So the NRL Vegas weekend, the crowd numbers were good and the fan engagement was good. So it's one of them. But anyway, I'm going to end that there. Thank you very much for your questions. Really appreciate it. It's been fun having a nice little chat and hangout. And I'll have some more content for you all very, very soon. Bye for now.